Yeah, so it just happens. Yeah.
Good morning and welcome to everybody. I would like to officially open today's meeting. It is 9:35 a.m. and I would like to acknowledge traditional owners and pay respects to elders past and present on the land in which this meeting is being held. As everybody is aware, there has been some changes to the DAP regulations and changes to the DAP standing orders, and we have two parts to this agenda. We have part B, which deals with City of Nedlands items, and part C that deals with the City of Stirling items, and we will be changing some of our members partway through the meeting. We will accordingly follow the processes set out in the agenda. We have a number of apologies for today's meeting. We have Fergus Bennett, Blaine Brackenridge and Michael Duac. The members for today's meeting are, from my furthest left, we have Councillor Kerry Smythe, Councillor Rebecca Coughlin, John Syme, Lee Donoghue, the Deputy Presiding Member. My name is Francesca Lafanti. There are no members on leave of absence. The minutes for this JDAP meeting, this DAP meeting as well as other DAP meetings will be available on the website. Members, you received a lot of information for this agenda, some of which was coming through as late as yesterday. Could I have a show of hands if you've been able to duly consider all matters on documentation as part B? Is that, sorry? That is unanimous for the minute taker. Members, are there any disclosures of interest for today's part B items? Yes. Sorry. That's okay.
Thank you. This is impartiality. This RAR was presented to the City of Nedlands Ordinary Council meeting on the 23rd of April 2024. Under section 2.1.2 of the JDAP Code of Conduct 2024, I acknowledge that I am not bound by any previous decisions or resolution of the local government. I undertake to exercise independent judgment in relation to any DAP application before me, which I will consider on its planning merits. I'm confident to participate in the JDAP meeting impartially without any prior commitment or bias, and I will consider any application entirely on its merits as presented to the JDAP.
Thank you for that interest disclosure. Could I just clarify that you're referring to item 3.1? And there's three items for Nedlands. My understanding you're referring to 3.1 was all of the items.
It's Thomas Street.
Thomas Street, 3.1. So if you can record that the impartial interest related to only item 3.1. Approval is granted for this member to fully participate in the agenda, and that includes voting on all of the three items. Yes, we have another interest. Thank you.
I'm not going to read it all out, but I have exactly the same. And I will vote according to, I have no conflicts of interest. Thank you.
Thank you. The interest is the same. The impartial interest relates to item 3.1. Approval is granted for the member to fully participate in this agenda, including voting on the item. Is there any other interests? There are no other interests. We now move forward to the application at item 3.1, which is for 1A Thomas Street in Nedlands. We have a number of presentations. A couple of them do have PowerPoint presentations. I understand that those with PowerPoint presentations have already been liaising with the department to make sure that they're up and ready to run. And I assume that all presenters are aware of the change of the DAP provisions, which you have 3 minutes for your presentations, and I'll be assisted by the JDAP Secretary on that time frame. When you get very close, we'll ask you to wrap it up, and I would encourage you to focus on your key matters you'd like to get across to us. I'd also like to state that all material that has been provided to the DAP has been forwarded to all members, and as you saw at the beginning of this agenda, they have all familiarised themselves with the material. We will start with Mr. Ken Perry.
Yeah.
3 minutes isn't long.
No, it's not.
And coming to the city is not necessarily as convenient as going to the city of Stirling or Nedlands. We start the bill.
Start.
Thank you. This project is a simple case of overreach by a developer because they want to make more money. Oh, that's fine. But the issue you face today is how will you exercise your discretion? This is what you're being paid a pittance to do. Right? It's well over 1,000 pages today, by the time you add everything up. And it's this exercise of discretion, which I will focus on because you've all read what I said. When reviewing the exercise of discretion matter, I was struck by the requirement of the panel to give due regard to, number 4, public and community input, which has a legitimate role in the planning process. And 5, genuine and proper consideration must be demonstrated. Will you, as DAP members today, have full confidence that you have ascribed the correct weight to your deliberations, including the public and the community? Look at the community members here. That's a failure. That is a failure of the system, not the members, a failure of the system. My submission also points out whether the members can be confident they do not have conflicts of interest that prevent them from achieving the right balance. It's a balancing act. The mere fact that one member here today has stated at the 2021 Chillingworth approval meeting that they are pro-development has given me great cause for alarm for a number of years. But I have mentioned this before. The basic issue for you to consider is that projects requiring approvals in excess of element objectives are essentially requesting the panel to give them an instant rezoning. I'm struck by the approach being adopted by Hesperia of the Smythe Road Nedlands Reserve Project. They are seeking a major rezoning with a conceptual total plan for the site. You all understand the process that has been launched, how long it will take and what it will involve. Compare this to the essentially off-the-cuff determinations of a DAP panel of rezonings that have previously occurred. We've seen them over and over again. I value the outcomes of the rezoning processes where everyone's interests are balanced. This project is an overreach. There are no community benefits identified, let alone valued. The proposal should simply be refused. They point out that there are no height limits along Stirling Highway Nedlands under LPS 3. This is Royal Commission stuff, as you appreciate, the whole stripping out of Nedlands and Nedlands only of height limits. They also totally ignore the $700,000 plot ratio bonus, but why not? You won't forget to give this due regard, I hope, will you? The focus is on you, DAP members, and your decision. The developers failed to point out that LPS 3 demands a mixed development. So if you're going to go LPS 3, then LPS 3 says there's got to be commercial downstairs. This is non-compliant.
You are at your 3 minutes. You're going to need to wrap it up.
Okay. The developer also points to William Stirling's flawed approval as an example. That's also on my Royal Commission list. Alternatively, the city is optimistic. They can negotiate further to achieve an acceptable project design, and they've asked for 120 days deferral. The choice between those two is yourself. Thank you.
Wrap up. That's the 3 minutes. But thank you. We do have your full presentation.
Yep.
All of the information you provided, we do have.
Thank you.
We will deal with all of the presenters before we go to questions from panel members. So we are going to have presenters one after the other, and then we'll go to panel.
Thank you.
Thank you. Our next presenter is Andrew, and I'm not sure I'm going to pronounce your name correctly. Wish, can you pronounce it for me?
Baranovsky, but I'm actually going to go last. So
we were hoping we could just come up together as a group.
Yep, you've got 3 minutes.
as a group or individually?
Three lots of 3
Individual
minutes.
3 minutes presentations. And again, like the earlier presenter, you'll be given advice when you're hitting that mark, and we will expect that you wrap it up at that point.
Okay.
Thank you.
Well, look, in the spirit of that process, we'll go with the architecture plans first, but if we can bring up the presentation, that'd be great. Appreciate the panel's attendance today, and my name is Tim Dawkins. I'm the applicant, the planner for the applicant, and we have Sean and Andrew, the architect and landscape architect. I'll wrap it up at the end with my 3 minutes, but just to go through it, I think it's worthwhile. maybe I'll combine that one. We're still on the clock. So look, I guess I appreciate Mr. Perry's comments. We're here with an application for 29 apartments. There is an existing approval on place for 26 apartments, but the reality is this isn't adding 3 apartments, it's adding 29 apartments because the other one is probably unable to happen. The site is zoned as it currently is zoned, and the height, local planning amendment 13 has been presented to the community for comment and has now been presented to the WPC, and that's going through a process. I've had plenty of rezoning scheme amendments not backed by the minister, so we can't assume that that's going to be the case. As the rules stand at the moment, the rules exist in the current context. This development is, I think, the shortest one that was approved under the scheme amendment and under its current height. Most of the other approvals I understand have been from 9, which is this one, to 24, which was, I think, Stirling. So we're operating within the current rules and the current expectations of the scheme. And most importantly, it's an exceptional design. As we work through the design review panel comments, there was 2 matters that were raised with them. One is the height of the development, which was referencing back to the draft amendment, which hasn't yet seen the minister's scheme. And there's the matter of the ramp, which we can accommodate comfortably. I noted the regulation 12 from Brian Keys and the draft conditions. We've reviewed them and we're happy with the draft conditions that could be applied should you have your mind to approve it. Just keen to answer any questions at the end and make sure you understand the design resolution of the site that's been achieved by Sean and Andrew. I do note that there was 20 submissions when I went to public advertising, 11 of support and 9 of not support, objection or otherwise, which is kind of really unheard of. But overwhelmingly, the majority of people are actually supporting this application in the context of what's there at the moment. There's a timeline which we set out in the process, but basically we lodged this application before the scheme amendment had been through the advertising process, and it's still in there. So we don't think that their regard for that process should be given much. And if I get the privilege at the end to talk about the context of the site, the site is actually wrapped around with zoning consistent with our zoning. We're not in a transitional zone. We don't back into anything which is preparing down. All the sites around us are zoned the same as us, including the library site, which is allocated significant height, and we're contiguous to that one as well. So we think in the grand scheme of things, we'll fit in nicely. So if it's okay, I'll pass on to Sean and we'll keep rolling through.
Thank you, Tim. My name is Sean van der Pol, Managing Director at Brad Architecture, the architects behind this proposal. Subject site, as Tim mentioned, is zoned RAC1 and is surrounded by other RAC1 zone properties to the north, south and west. While other projects in this zoning have sought to achieve significant development scale, with apartments numbering in the hundreds, our client has opted to pursue a boutique development outcome for the site, consisting of just 29 apartments. The following slides show how the built form and massing of the design was developed. These steps include increased podium setbacks, reduction in overall podium height from 4 to 3 stories on the south side, larger setbacks to the upper floors, recessing of the top floor to effectively hide this level from the street, and finally the introduction of planting throughout the design. You can see the render on the right. Visualising the future built form anticipated along Thomas Street, our proposal sits within the denser RAC1 zoning and is appropriately scaled at 10 stories plus a recessed amenity level. This zoning then steps down to 5-storey R160 and 3-storey R60 developments. As shown in these Google Earth representations, the large rear setback combined with the existing and proposed tree canopy within the design mean that significant portions of the proposal are screened when viewed from both Stirling Highway and Thomas Street. The design draws upon elements from the surrounding context, including white picket fences and the civic language and materiality of the nearby UWA campus. The podium design features a luxe marble facade, synonymous with boutique and high-end fashion retailers, while the upper levels of the proposal feature delicate vertical battens to control privacy and light, while also adding shadow and depth to the facade. This diagram shows the existing Nedlands streetscape character of landscape verges, white picket fences, and landscape front yards along Thomas Street. Our design incorporates these contextual elements vertically up the building. extending the leafy street character of Nedlands and setting a design benchmark for future developments in the area. The design also features the podium facade, inspired by surrounding commercial and civic buildings. These design elements come together to create a unique and contextual element built form outcome, which is elegant and appropriate for the site. In terms of development, we've been told that we've been overdeveloping the site by a number of people, but the overshadowing that we're proposing is well below the percentages outlined within acceptable outcomes of section acceptable outcomes of the R codes volume 2. We also have 100% of apartments achieving natural cross ventilation, significantly exceeding the R codes volume 2 requirement of 60%. The proposed vehicle entry / exit ramp for this development has been cited by City of Nedlands as one of the reasons this project has received a recommendation of deferral at officer level. This slide shows the proposed ramp location shaded blue. A traffic engineer for the project has assessed this ramp and is supportive of both the design and location, as shown in their commentary on the right of the page. This same commentary and justification was provided to City of Nedlands Engineering Department when the previous 9-story proposal was being assessed 2 years ago. And at the time, this justification was accepted and supported by the city. This can be seen on the next slide, showing the previous drawings and associated ramp location, which is identical to the current location. Given the ramp has remained.
You need to wrap your presentation up. You're at 3 minutes now.
Cool. And I think Andrew will be only 1 minute, so I'll just be using a little bit of his time, but I'll be wrapping up soon.
You need to wrap up soon, yeah.
Sure,
Not
thanks.
quite how it works.
Given the ramp has remained unchanged and is previously supported by the city, we do not believe this is a valid reason for deferring the application. We have a number of ESD principles that have been incorporated into the design, including solar cells. Also, all windows are double glazed. Materials for the development are high end. I'm just going to flick through some quick images of the development to show the design quality of the proposal. So entry, lobby, rooftop amenity, outdoor area. And finally, to round out my presentation, I'd like to finish by drawing attention to the positive feedback provided by the City's own design review panel shown on this slide. Thank you for your time. I want to hand over to Andrew from planning.
Thank you. You have a short
Thanks,
version
Sean.
now. Have time.
No problem. Thanks, Sean. I'll be very brief. Thanks, Sean. So I guess the brief for this development is high quality. So from our point of view, it was always about respecting the streetscape, the kind of leafy character of Nedlands, but also introducing a very high quality landscape outcome at ground level and throughout the different levels of the development. And I guess the positive feedback received from DRP has been interesting, and we've actually adopted the majority of the comments that have come back. So we've increased deep soil at ground level on the western boundary to increase tree planting and also screening to that western boundary. Setback and streetscape quality on Thomas Street's been increased. The level of amenity to the ground level apartments has also been increased through that DRP process and the feedback that's come through. As Sean mentioned, throughout the development, there's a range of planters and landscapes on the different levels. So from an amenity point of view, it's very high quality. There's a range of amenity for the residents of this development, and the overall softening of the built form is exemplary, I think, for a project of this type. Again, high quality materiality has been included in the project. So from granite, from different paving types, materiality throughout. So this is really in response to Sean's architectural language. Planting types, so we've gone for a really mix and a diversity of planting throughout in response to the City of Nedlands' own policies in terms of biodiversity, a range of different tree types, increasing tree planting along Thomas Street, and then using citrus as well throughout the development to help create that level of amenity. Again, shrub planting, feature shrubs and ground covers throughout, so seasonal colour and change, and we focused on the different light qualities within the development. And of course, part of the DRP process has been an increase in deep soil, so we have now 10% tree deep soil, and we're about 3 times the actual tree canopy cover at all levels. So from our point of view, an exemplary project that we are very proud to be part of. Thank you.
Thank you. Panel members, we will go to questions and then we'll go to the City of Nedlands officers. Panel members, are there any questions to the first four presenters? Yes, sorry, John, and then Lee.
Yeah, look, first of all, yes, it's a nice design. I agree with that. So that's as read. And it's a good building form. However, you've got in the current plan, the approved plan, you've got plot ratio at the moment of 3.18. You're proposing 3.85. You're in a zoning of 388 RAC1, which has got a guideline, which has got a plot ratio indication of 3. Now 3 to 3.18 is something that would routinely say as being a minor variation, but 3 to 3.85 is a substantial change. What sort of justification can we take from you as to why that amount of change should be there?
Well, I'll start. The plot ratio is generally in the planning sense taken as a measure of Bolton scale and also a measure of development intensity. There's 29 apartments. There's not intense development, so it's not going to manifest itself in traffic or other things in the street, people coming and going. And in the terms of the Bolton scale, the building is essentially the same form, but recessed to the top. So I don't believe people will be able to see the top except for those long views probably coming from the UWA. But at the ground level and as it relates to the sites around it, the Bolton scale is effectively unchanged from the building that exists as is approved. There's just a rationalisation of the space within it that's made some of the apartments merge together because that's what the market sounding said that they need. And then the actual build form is obviously standard. And so site to the west, which is the library site, which is allocated under the city's policy, recently adopted policy, which doesn't relate to the scheme amendment, shows a lot more height, and so height and bulk plot ratio essentially go hand in glove. So I would expect that site would be built out at the same sort of scale.
It's also probably worth mentioning that the site is well within our proposal. It's not overly overshadow the lots to the south. And it also provides over and above the deep soil area and planting or structure than what we're required. So from a development point of view, we're ticking all those boxes. We have 100% cross ventilation, solar access to the rest. So we feel like it is, performing. And if it wasn't overdevelopment of the site, we believe that the overshadowing and other things would not be compliant, but they all are. We've also got all the parking is below is in the basements. And so even, if we take a plot ratio argument, usually parking on ground level would all not be counted. We've dropped all that into the basement to get a better street connection, amenity, sort of terraced type appeal for the apartments. That's obviously more costly way to do this, but we believe it's getting great outcomes. But it also has meant that, we have essentially a shorter building with the plot ratio that we have compared to, say, across the road was 17 stories at 3.8, 3.75, and we're 11 stories.
Yeah, look, I suppose just reading through everything that you've provided us with, I didn't see very much commentary or any commentary at all on the strategy, on the Stirling Highway strategy that has been endorsed by Council, which probably does form the basis of Amendment 13. And I acknowledge Amendment 13 is, we don't know what's going to happen with that, but I'd like some commentary about the strategy, which clearly shows and has given us some parameters to work in terms of transitioning. This site is not on Stirling Highway. It is in from Stirling Highway. I'd just like some commentary around that, because you're asking for 2 extra floors, an extra plot ratio, with justification being based on construction costs and those sorts of issues. So if you could please.
Absolutely, thank you, Lee. We're not asking for extra floors because we did above what the rules are. We're asking for extra floors because that's where we need to go, but we didn't go there in the first place. So we could have turned up on day one and asked for that. We wanted this to be a boutique development. We wanted it to be a low number of apartments that could actually achieve practical start. And that's so we didn't want to have to get pre-sales for 50 things or 75 things. It was supposed to be the development creates a community. But there's a real intangible thing in WA where the state government has particular controls, most of the controls, and other things that the local government control. So we see that all the time where the minister, and we all know that how that was signed off, that Met Scheme 3 was brought into place, and it's written by Barry Hassel or Bill Hassel under duress. This was brought in by the minister. It's the minister's scheme. So there's been an initiated amendment to the minister's scheme who asked for this to occur in a particular way, and there's no clarity around what that happens. For another policy to come in to try and be underneath that, to try and change the rules, because maybe it doesn't get the support of the minister but doesn't need it, is which has primacy. I believe that the planning scheme will always have primacy, and it deliberately removed heights and had a vision for this precinct. So we're yet to see what the outcome of that is. This approval is suggested to have, if it gets approved, the draft conditions say 4 years. If we can't make it achieved in 4 years, and that's all played out, yes, the new height controls will be in place, notwithstanding the fact that there is ability under the ARCOs to develop to more than the acceptable solution. But we're saying we're applying under the current rules, and to come through with a planning policy to basically try and preempt the outcome of that scheme amendment, I think is inappropriate. It's a different issue altogether. I know the challenges that Nedlands are having, but there was an amendment put to the minister for a tree protection policy, didn't get up. So the written local planning policy to try and effectively do the same thing. So we don't think that planning policy to try and usurp the scheme is appropriate. But let's wait and see what happens with the scheme amendment. And sure, if that happens, then this development should come back. Would have to be in the frame of those things. But I don't think the policy or strategy gets a lot of consideration when the minister, it's the minister's scheme, and the minister's the person that makes the final decision.
I also just mention that the scheme indicates 6 to 8 stories for our
Sorry,
site.
can you speak up a little bit?
The scheme indicates
The strategy.
The strategy indicates 6 to 8 stories for our site and 8 to 10 stories for the city's library site, which adjoins us. And our building is essentially a 10-story plus recessed rooftop. So we feel like it interfaces very well with what is exactly adjacent to our proposal, if that scheme were to happen, that sort of amendment. But yeah, it does seem ironic that the city's own site is 8 to 10, same zoning as ours, which is 6 to 8. And yeah.
Any other questions from panel members? Yes.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to ask about the element 4.15 energy efficiency on the agenda, page 17. It says the final sentence, in the event of approval, a condition would be recommended for the above, so that's energy efficiency. We have received through the papers an alternate recommendation for approval with conditions. Can you say what you think about this energy efficiency condition being added, and do you believe it's been added in that set of conditions that have come forward anyway?
My reading was that condition 24 was that supposed condition. But we'd be happy. We're committing to these things. So whatever, if it needs to be tightened up, we're happy for that to occur. But condition 24, to my read, was that condition.
I'll ask the officer the same question about that. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
I've got a number of questions.
Yes.
The NCHAC, the Nedlands strategy, there used to be a terminology in previous reports of having serious regard. If a planning policy has gone out for consultation and it's in the pipeline, it's definitely a policy. And the narrative behind this today is to introduce trees. That's completely unfair. The tree policy went to a state-wide policy, which Walga and others are developing at the moment. So I want to park that one straight away. I don't think that is a fair argument today. So I don't think that even should have been brought up. I also noted that there was a lot of commentary around the landscaping. Landscaping doesn't take away from height. And you're actually asking for an additional plot ratio, as has been alluded to by my colleague next door. So I'm just putting that out there, that one of the major problems we're seeing here today is height. Now, you keep referring to the library site. I haven't seen anything in the Nedlands scripts as I've been there 4.5 years about anything to do with the library. You're making a lot of assumptions. Can you give me some further commentary so I understand why you keep inferring to the adjacent site?
Well, that site is allocated to 8 to 10 stories.
Of course, but We're not dealing with that. We're dealing with what you've put on the table today. I can read the codes clearly. I can understand the transitions. I can understand that this is set back from the highway. I can see the R160 going to single residential. So I just wanted to say that I also feel that that narrative shouldn't be in what we're talking about today. Other than that is a code sitting next door. The other issue I want to talk about is community. Can you tell me a little bit more about why you yourselves, apart from showing the streetscape and the trees and what's in Thomas Street, why have you not given us more about the community benefit of this building today?
We think the community benefit is its excellent design, and it will withstand the test of time by aging elegantly and being a beautiful building in line with the planning framework. The community benefit is something that's kind of fraught. So when we went through the first process, it is in the mixed use zone, as Mr. Perry noted, but we were told people didn't want to drag things down Thomas Street, they didn't want those sorts of things in the street. So we could listen to that, and we did that. But in terms of other community benefit, we don't really know what would be required or expected of a site like this, apart from being a very good neighbourly building. There's no requirement for that to justify the additional height or anything under Nedlands Scheme 3, which talks about there being no height limit.
Right. Well, the other question I wanted to talk about is the inference that the minister imposes. We know the history of local planning scheme 3, but at the same time, the planning policies have been a catch up because of the way, and we're doing our very best. So the inference that it's not helpful in the dialogue to actually say the city's doing this, we're doing that. We're all trying to work within the planning framework. Why have you not, I go back to it again, why have you not put more consideration of the NCHAC rather than say it's the minister's scheme? It's unhelpful. Can you just give me a little bit more so I can fully understand the thinking around the site, please?
I didn't get to my timeline in the presentation, but we conceived this all before that was happening. So when we lodged this application, they'd only just put out to advertising that policies. We hadn't seen it. So it didn't exist. We have an approval in place, and we designed it based upon what the rules were and still currently are under the scheme. So we actually lodged it and conceived it with the rules that were there at the time. So
It was not available.
it wasn't available. So when we it's now been advertising at the same time as we're up advertising. So we don't get a line of sight of that. But the reality is the scheme process, until the ministers sign off on the scheme and it's gazetted, the scheme is the scheme, and the policy is something that is a policy that would inform the scheme moving forward. So it's kind of a bit back to front. But we also think that is also a guideline, and this is a development which stands on its feet in the context. The reason why we're talking about the library is because the context that the future context that it might present, and the desire to have height on that site, 8 to 10 stories, and how that would actually relate to our site, and how the buildings would look together. So we have had regard to policy, but it was after we've lodged, so the development was prepared in rules in line with a different time when that wasn't available to us.
Well, the other thing that we've not been able to talk about today is the economic considerations and the availability of building within that frame of the proposal that was put before us previously. So what do you see as the baseline for when you decide to change, to go to a different proposal? Because we're actually sitting here today because you've come back for another design. So what's your commentary around that? Because we can't go there. So I'm interested in what the baseline is for a developer, an architect, and the team to actually say, right, go back to another form one.
Thank you. No, it's a great question. It's been a 3-year process so far for us with our particular client. The previous proposal, which was amended slightly, but essentially stayed the same at 26 to 27 apartments, has been priced by 2 builders, and they've also demolished the site as they were preparing to start that proposal. During the pricing process, construction prices were escalating so quickly that they could not keep up. Sales prices were not growing at the same rate, and this is probably not news to anyone, but it's an extremely difficult climate to get a development up and working. And I would I don't think this is an issue with our particular project at all, because you would look down Stirling Highway now and none of the projects along the RAC1 area, none of them are being built. Not a single one. And so we are in that same situation where right now there is no way that we can build the previous one. If this does not get approved, and that's, you know, it's not up to us at all, but if this does not get approved, nothing will happen on the site. We don't have that fallback position. We're not coming here to have a, you know, get a super profit or something or whatever it's been inferred. If the previous one cannot be built, and this is, I guess, the only option that we have to try and get some development and some, what we believe is an amazing design that complies with all of the R code volume 2 requirements. To get that to work, this is the option we have available to us.
And if I could just add, we're in the middle of a housing crisis, but it is a time-limited crisis. We're not asking for this to be giving us rain forever. If we can't make this work in the next 4 years, the new rules will be what the rules are. So that's fine. We're asking for the rules to apply as they apply at today's thing, to give us 4 years to have a go at it. In terms of super profits and things like that, there's also a lot of builders and developers going broke. So no one's asking to be bailed out. You basically want to create a sustainable building industry so people can have homes. This is homes for 29 people. And we want to see this happen because people are struggling to find somewhere to live.
My last question is about mixed development on the site. You haven't considered any mixed use, even though LPS 3 does define it, but can you give me a comment about that, please?
Sure. It just wasn't appropriate, we believed, for the residential street. So we've kept this residential. That was our approach the first time. It was widely supported by the city. And I believe the submissions at the time as well from the community were supportive of not bringing commercial uses onto that street. And we've kept that approach, which we believe is by far the best approach for this site. And it also aligns with your policy that you're bringing in as well.
Once upon a time, it was one site which went all the way to the Stirling Highway, and I think people were thinking, well, it was thought of in the lens of being a Stirling Highway site, but I don't think the intention was to drag mixed use down all the side streets. So that was something we heard clearly, and we listened.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have one question, and it kind of covers matters that have been already raised today. It talks to the plot ratio. I know your comments about the economic viability. Those, for us, are outside of our decision-making considerations. So I'd like a commentary around the plot ratio. I suppose my question relates to plot ratio deals with both scale and height. And I'm interested in you presenting the rationale for your justification for our exercise of discretion, the planning rationale in this context for the additional plot ratio, because obviously there are many ways that you can deal with plot ratio. It doesn't have to go up, it can go out. But I'm also interested in why the need for additional in the planning context, and why it's appropriate that we consider the plot ratio, and two, the manner in which you have allocated that plot ratio. So it's probably more of a planning question, but I'll leave it to the team to answer.
Yeah, I mean, it's really about trying to deal with numbers. It was a long time ago, but I was involved in rewriting the R codes, and we talked about trying to get rid of plot ratio altogether because it's a very numeric, and it doesn't result in good design necessarily. But it's a value as love it, and it's a way to understand the site. So how do you actually think about what you get inside? But if you step past the numbers, then we just say, okay, it is what it is. Does the site sit on itself? Does the design resolve itself effectively on the site? Regardless of what the number is, because if we didn't put the number in the page, you probably wouldn't even be on anyone's mind because the building's so elegant the way that it actually sits there and sits on the site. So we think that yes, the numerical number exists, but when you say to someone there's unlimited height or no height limit along the Stirling Highway and can be up to 24 stories or whatever, but then to actually say that you have to also still meet the plot ratio at the same time, we don't think it's quite the intent of that provision. It's about saying you have to work really hard to demonstrate that your development sits nicely and is in of its context. It's beautiful, but and the impacts are managed. So what is a tall building? Why do people have a internal fear of tall buildings? It's the impact. So it's shadowing, overlooking, bulk and scale. And I think we've dealt with those three things very elegantly and within the expectations of the R codes.
Thank you. I have no other comments or questions at this juncture. Is there any further questions from panel? If not, we will move to city officers, which I understand are online.
Oh no, they're here.
Sorry, in the room. I beg your pardon. Sorry, city officers. Put my glasses on, I'll be able to see. Would you like to come forward and present and then we'll have questions to yourself.
Thank you. I would just like to say the issues you've already identified, plot ratio and height are the two major issues here. And it relates back to the element objectives of whether it responds to the desired future character and scale of the area and the planning for the area. So that's the element objectives for both plot ratio and height. So that is covered more by the Nedlands Stirling Highway Activity Corridor Strategy. So we recognize that the scheme is not certain, but the strategy represents the the city's endorsed vision for the area. So that strategy comes out of a number of different documents that have done over years. They've been done over the years. Most recently in 21-22, there's community reference groups that came up with objectives and a vision plan for the area. And then that was translated into sort of built form modeling. And that all made its way into the intact strategy. So as far as we are trying to maintain is that strategy sets out the desired character and the future scale of the area that the city intends. Notwithstanding that the exact acceptable outcome for height has been removed from the scheme, you still have to apply the element objectives. So I think that's sort of the summary of our argument. I've got also our traffic engineer here if you have any questions about the ramping roads.
Thank you. Panel members, are there questions? Yes, sorry.
No, I was just going to ask you to introduce your names for the people online.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I'm Nathan Blumenthal.
And I'm Aaron McNish.
Yeah, look, thank you. Look, it seems to me if this design, this approach that's proposed here, if you combine the landscape presentation and the architectural presentation, what it seems to me they've done is to go for a rather taller, slender building and give room for a fair bit of landscaping around the edge, which I think, in my view, is a very good strategy. What it does is it challenges height, which is what they've done here. They've got an argument that says, well, the top floor, the top two floors are actually set back, so from any sort of vantage point, they won't be visible or not apparent, and therefore bulk and scale is attended to in that way. How do you respond to that? Because there is a reasonable argument there, it seems to me.
So I'd say, going back to the strategy, the intent is to sort of graduate those heights. And it's not simply the heights in the direct vicinity of the area, but you've got the approach along Stirling Highway. So the idea is that as you travel along Stirling Highway, you have the buildings that graduate in height as you go towards activity centers and then away from them. So while this may not be visible sort of directly from the street, it will have an impact from further away, and it will also lead to other developments saying, well, there's just 10 stories, so we're going to graduate up to that, and we'll have it's a gradual erosion of the ultimate height.
Any further questions? Yes, Carrie.
Thanks. I would like to ask, with regard to the recommendation for the 120-day deferral, what, at the end of that 120 days, what would you see as the optimum position that would be coming back? What are you hoping to achieve in that 120 days?
Frankly, it would be the reduction in height. That's the big sticking point. We're not, the other elements are supportive of, but it goes back to that height and bulk and scale, primarily as it relates to height. So we want to see a shorter building.
Well, how much?
Well, that was when we could get into design considerations, whether the acceptable outcomes of 9 stories be appropriate, or whether you could have, I believe, as in the previous one they did, where they had 8 stories and then a communal area on top, something like that. That would be more in keeping with the intent of the area.
So are you asking for 1 story to be cut out or 2 stories?
I don't know if we commit to a specific story. We have to see how that would affect it. Obviously, if you take it down to 9 stories, then acceptable outcomes, it's an easy thing to say. If you have it 10 stories, that's something we would have to look at in terms of the context and how it looks.
I'm just trying to get to the 120 days down the track, and we hear again would the city be at, do you think, at an approval, or would they be at a refusal?
If the height is reduced, it's potential we could be supportive, but it depends on how much it's reduced by and what it looks like.
And then it would be a refusal. Is that what you're saying?
Otherwise, if the height is still an issue, yes, we would recommend.
Just repeating the question I asked about the element 4.15, energy efficiency. Can you tell me if that condition 24 that the proponents answered covers the concerns that were in the report?
Yes. I think that's-
So that covers off on that?
That would cover off on that.
No need for another condition?
Correct, yes. They'd have to comply with everything in there.
Thank you.
Yes, so you talked about the transition of the Nedlands strategy, and you've talked about the height going towards activity centres. I didn't ask the previous presenters, so I want to ask you. There's been reference all along about precinct, so the former heights, but we saw the Chilling, as it's now known colloquially, Chillingworth sites 4 times that's come to the DAP. We've seen William Stirling. They're being referenced all the time. Could you actually give me some commentary around precedent in decision making and how the strategy actually now sits within that?
Yes.
Are we resetting it with the strategy? That's what I like to know.
So yes, particularly with William Stirling, we were hampered in sort of determination of height because the scheme removes acceptable outcomes, and there was at that point no strategy in place. So there was no set desired future scale and character of the area. There wasn't anything that council had endorsed, the community had reviewed, that the community was supportive of to say this is what we want the area to look like. So that didn't exist at the time, so we didn't have that to fall back onto. Now this was endorsed this year, the strategy was endorsed this year, and this is what we are using to say this is what council and the community desire to see in the area. And that this should be used as a mechanism to guide outcomes in the absence of any sort of strict controls.
So I've got a question.
Sorry, no.
My question, sorry, Rebecca, did you have, Councillor, had you to finish speaking? I beg your pardon. My question goes to the same sort of conversation. It's particularly in relation to the planning framework, where you have an existing planning framework, scheme amendment that's currently hasn't any weight to it. It's going through, it's in the early stages, and you have a strategy in place setting the desired character. And your comments that the primary concern that you have in relation to this development is height. My question is, how do you reconcile the consistency between, or comment can you provide about the consistency between the planning framework and the weight that's placed on the strategy in the context with being consistent with higher order planning instruments? And I am specifically referring to the existing provisions on the site. So it's a weight about that I'd be interested in hearing your comments on, that is given to the planning strategy in the context of height, given that the other processes that are following are yet to have any weight.
Sure. So the existing planning framework in our local planning scheme, actually the only thing it says about height is that, I don't remember the exact phrasing, but it basically says it deletes the acceptable outcomes for height, they're not a consideration. So that's all it does. So it doesn't actually set a certain height. It doesn't actually do anything except say that the acceptable outcomes are not something you look at. So therefore you jump to the element objectives. So which you would always do in any event. So the actual planning framework doesn't set a limit, and nor does it say you can go as high as you want. You refer to the element objectives. The other thing you have in there as the ARCODES is the plot ratio. And given the absence of any strict maximum on heights, you can also use plot ratio as a way of saying, well, what is consistent with the area? What would we expect to have there? And this is a plot ratio of 3.85 and of 3. So these are all sort of ways we can assess it without a strict height requirement. So I would say it doesn't contradict, the strategy doesn't contradict the state framework. It just sets, it allows us to have guidelines and sets criteria that people should and could expect to have in the area.
So just on that adjunct from that, can you talk about this particular site, the framework that talks about an unlimited height? But in other similar types of zones, this classification, that unlimited height's not there, and the archives refer to a 9-storey building.
Yes.
Can you talk about, so in that context, your strategy talks about something lower than that.
Yes.
Can you talk about that in the context of both your strategy and the intention or the consistent, and again, I'm back on the same question, the planning, the higher order planning documents, and I suppose the question I'm kind of alluding to is, are you effectively changing base zoning by looking at something that's below what even the codes would talk about as generally as that use class, zoning classification? You're going down at 6 to 8 by your strategy. And again, it's that comment for me about reconciling a local strategy with a higher order document and how I balance and put weight to those things. So why so much, why down at those numbers rather than using the sort of generic number that the barcodes typically use for, again, not a specific area because you have some site, but why was that not a consideration? Why is it so much lower?
Yeah, so the idea was that you would have specific centers along or specific nodes along the Stirling Highway where you would have the most height. And then, so that would go above what's now the acceptable outcomes now. And then other nodes which would be a bit lower. So in those other nodes that are lower, like these potential future residential zones like this one sits in, yes, it would be envisaging a height lower than the acceptable outcomes, but in that case, you are still governed by the plot ratio. So you can still achieve your plot ratio of 3 and fit under those heights. So that's how we were looking at it.
Thank you. Any other questions from panel? Yes, John.
You're putting a lot of store on the strategy. If we were having this meeting a few months ago and the strategy didn't exist, what would your presentation look like?
Yes, it would be more problematic. You'd have what we had to do with the William Stirling one, which was there was nothing set in stone. The city had a lot of background documents, but none of them were public facing. None of them were something that we could point to and say, this is what the character of the area should be. So yes, we wouldn't be having this argument several months ago prior to this document. That's sort of the primary key element here is the strategy.
My last question.
Can I just
Yes,
ask
you
on that
certainly can.
point? My understanding was that the strategy was required as the stepping stone to get to the scheme amendment. Is that, and explain the scheme amendment? Is that which the scheme amendment then would be the higher instrument of this decision, but this was a process to get there. And it shouldn't be dismissed because it's only a strategy, because it was a stepping stone to the next step, the amendment. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's probably correct. Yeah, it sort of uses a roadmap of saying, here's what we want to do, and then here's how we have to actually encode it in statutory protections. It's, I would say actually going back to your question, you would then have plot ratio as well. If you're looking at a plot ratio of 3.85, is that consistent with what's happening in the acceptable outcomes in terms of what is envisaged for this sort of zoning?
Can I ask not a tangential question, but something which goes to the formulation of the strategy and why height is a key element. And you said before that if something like this strategy gets endorsed by the Minister, and you end up with 6 to 8 on a RAC1 zoning, the implication would be that you end up with rather more site coverage and rather less landscaping. Is that something that you've taken into account, or is that something that you would be looking at modifying? Because you've got a tension between a serious tension between the amount of greenery that you can actually have in deep soil in particular and height. And the trade-off, if height is the crude measure which says, well, you can't go any higher than that, then you're really starting to to endanger the landscaping element as well, which, you know, if we go back to green leafy Nedlands, that's something which is also very, very, very important, and I think reasonably so.
Yes. Yes, we have done some modeling around it. We haven't gotten to the point where we are looking at statutory requirements. I also just want to clarify, Amendment 13 doesn't set heights. All it does is recommends deleting that clause that deletes the acceptable outcomes. So it effectively reverts back to the R codes at this point. Anything we do in the future is something we'd have to do with some more background and consideration to address, some of the points you raised, exactly, like if you have the plot ratio, and without the height, you tend to spread out. How do we address that?
Have more height.
Yeah, well, yes.
Height becomes,
Potentially,
height
yes.
becomes not
Height
the
becomes-
crude measure, it becomes just one of many, and this is
Sure.
just the danger with concentrating on height and nothing else.
Yes. Yes, no, that's acknowledged, yes. In some ways, height rather than bulk is a preferred outcome. But it just, we haven't, like I said, we haven't gone that in depth yet on these specific sites.
So
Yes,
can I
another
just ask one
question,
more
yes.
question? Could you make a comment about the RAR and specifically going back to the framework with which you write that RAR? And just, I want to expand a little bit more about community benefits, because you're getting into leafy green Nedlands, you're getting into a plot that was purchased at a certain price point because of the historic settlement of that area and how it's evolved. Can you tell me more about community benefit from this building? And it might be a high class design, we might be in a housing crisis, but it's going to be at a certain price point. So I want to know how that is going to help the community. Can you tell me why you haven't expanded more on that in the RAR?
I think there's a lot of confusion between sort of community benefit and development incentives for community benefit. And that sort of thing. So we don't actually have any provisions for development incentives for community benefit. So when they talk about community benefit, they're talking about what does this building, give back? How does it look to the neighborhood? But not in terms of, does it have something that everybody can use? Is it something that people from the neighborhood can access? It's sort of more when they're talking about community benefit, they're talking about sort of aesthetics and appearance and how it fits in, rather than something that the city is asking for or has a framework to receive. So we don't actually have any framework for community benefit.
Any other questions, panel members? If there are no other questions, thank you, officers. We will move back to the agenda. There is a recommendation in the agenda, and there's an alternate. As per the standard, standing order 2024, we will deal first with the recommendation in RA. It's a recommendation for deferral. Is there a mover for the RA recommendation? It is moved. Member Kerry Smythe. Is there a seconder? It is seconded. Member Rebecca Collins. The mover likes to speak to it.
I've lost the page here. So, wait a minute. Sorry about this. I'm just trying to get to the item. Sure. There's not there. I haven't got very much to say other than just to emphasise the reasons for the RA recommendation. This did not get a lot of discussion when it went through council. In fact, I think it was just passed through en bloc because the council saw that it was a deferral and agreed with what was the officer's recommendation, and so it was seen as a reasonable way to go to the deferral to attempt to achieve the what was said, that the development is inconsistent with the desired bulk and scale of the area as set out in the strategy, the Stirling Highway strategy, and the R codes, and does not meet the Australian Standard 2890.1 for the vehicle ramps, which may cause pedestrian safety issues. So that's all I have to say on this. That I support the officer recommendation, which is the RAR.
Thank you. Is there a second, like to speak to the item?
Thank you, presiding member. I also want to support deferral for 120 days, but it's important that when we defer it, we actually have a reason for deferral so that we come back with the reduction in height, which has been talked about. So I just go back to the words, reduce the building height and plot ratio to make the scale of development more consistent with the desired future scale of the area. So I'm just talking about point 1 here. That's very powerful because we've heard about plot ratio right from the beginning when we ask questions. We're talking about a plot ratio of 3.85. At the moment, we've talked about element objectives, and then we've talked about acceptable outcomes. So we've all got to go back to the Design WA suite of documents. So they're very subjective in some respects and very interpretive in other respects. But what we actually need to keep talking about is plot ratio, because that's the consistency here that we've got away from with this redesign. So we actually have got the issues around community benefit. I still stick to that issue. We also have talked a lot about landscaping and deep soil, but once you get a deep soil that might thrive if it's got a space to grow and put its roots down, it only actually shades up to about 4 stories if it's a nice, tall, endemic species trees. From there, you are actually seeing the height. Nothing will take away from the height. And that height, in terms of the strategy that the City of Nedlands has developed, which is seriously entertained at the moment, is above what is desired for the character of this area. So we need to keep going back to that today we are looking at extra height, and we can't really justify that extra height. No arguments this morning and in the reading have actually justified that height. The reference to the City of Nedlands Library should be disregarded in that site because it is an adjacent site. It has got an R code on it, but at the moment we are looking at this site, so we must concentrate on that. And I also believe that any economic consideration should be disregarded because it's not within the planning framework of what the MIDAP is able to work with this morning. So we're actually asked today to look at a development which has repercussions for the area. It has repercussions for the whole precedent within the new strategy. We're looking at it within a different scenario at the moment due to that strategy, and who knows how it's going to go, and we're hopeful that it will be seen positively, and it's work that you would expect a city to be doing. Had we not been doing that strategy, we would have been remiss because we needed to get lots of planning policies to play catch up. And I praise the community for coming to the reference groups and for putting in their submissions and for the city officers working with it. So I would like the support for the deferral, and I would like it to come back with the readjustment of the height and to look at the design. And yes, you have to go taller to get away from the bulk. But I just don't think today that we can actually just sit here and say, it's a great design. It adds to the housing. It's what the area needs. It's giving community development because of the use of materials and the way it presents, and the entertainment area at the top is recessed back. So we've got the wording around the deferral, and that's what we need to do this morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other speakers on the motion?
Yes, look, I first of all would like to say that I do think this is a really well-designed building, and I think the architects have gone to a lot of effort to create a slender, higher building. And I also acknowledge Mr. Dawkins' comments about the scheme and the strategy and where they sit in the whole planning framework. However, I am going to support deferral at this stage I am, we don't know what's going to happen with Amendment 13, and that will change a whole lot of things if the Minister does, in the end, endorse it as it is. However, I think that the strategy that has been compiled is one that Nedlands has been working towards for some time and has been the subject of a number of discussions with officers that have come before this panel. And I would feel remiss not to take the strategy as it exists into account at this point in time. As I explained, I see the strategy as being important in allowing a reduction in height going through to the residential streets. And I think that that's something that needs to be finely tuned. And I think the strategy is the first way toward that. So on that basis, I will be supporting the deferral motion, acknowledging that this is a really nicely designed development, but I just cannot support the extra height at this point in time. And I'd also like to make an issue. I'm sympathetic about the construction issues at this time, but it's not a planning consideration. So I'm going to be supporting deferral.
Any other speakers on the motion? John?
Yeah, look, first of all, I've got no real problem with the vehicle access ramps. I think that's either solvable, or I've seen other designs where a similar approach has been taken and they're quite satisfactory. So that's not the main issue. I would very much like to be able to approve this design. It's a very nice design. It meets a good area in the market, which I think is going to be valuable in Nedlands. However, we do have to have some regard for the planning framework. And I must say that the sort of work that the City of Nedlands has finally done is something which has been missing for quite a long time, in my view. I don't know the extent to which it'll survive in its current form. It might be modified before it gets fully endorsed and turns into a scheme. But it certainly gives us an indication of where the city is going. Now, that's important in that it is showing quite high, historically in terms, there's still quite high buildings, 9, 10-story, 11-story buildings and so on. We're talking about changes at the margin here. I'm not convinced entirely by the approach that the city is adopting, in that it's starting to exacerbate a tension which is inevitably going to be there between site coverage and height. And I think height as a crude measure is a very poor one. However, in this case, we are looking at substantial increases in plot ratio. I think that a further discussion with the city, between the developer and the city, by way of a deferral would be useful. That may be, in fact, just a different way of presenting what is there, or it may be changes to the scheme itself. I think that the city, and certainly I would be open to all sorts of different approaches, and I personally would be not hooked on height as a crude measure itself. I think it has to do with what the overall planning outcomes are going to be and why we're doing this planning stuff in the first place. But I think that I would support a deferral. I think that for all of the benefits and all of the positive qualities of this design, I think it does need some either better explanation or some attention paid to the difference between the plot ratio as in the R codes, that is 3, and the plot ratio which is proposed 3.85. That is a big difference. It does impact on bulk and scale. That bulk and scale in this case has not been properly investigated, and I think it needs at least that. If that means that we knock a story off, then that's as it is. It'll still be different to what the current one is. So I think I would, in this case, I would support a deferral.
I will make a few comments on this proposal. For me, the consideration has been balancing the various planning instruments that relate to it. From my perspective, the weight that's placed on the strategy is of a level of immediate, but I'm also conscious of some of the existing planning framework that's around it, currently in place, particularly in relation to the archives and particularly in relation to the scheme provisions. The policy definitely does provide a strategy in terms of the built form and the design of the area, the future design. I would, however, state that the current framework provides, the current framework in terms of those two documents that I referred to provide a future outcome, different from the desired future outcome as set in the strategy. I'm not comfortable with setting the strategy so much higher than the other existing documents. The strategy is the forerunner to the scheme amendment. The scheme amendment is currently not imminent or certain, and I also have some reservations that the strategy has elements in it that are actually augmenting some of the key considerations, even just in the codes when you look at this particular zone. So I think there's a number of steps that go forward to the proposal. So from my perspective, I give weight to the strategy, but I wouldn't give it ultimate weight in the context of height, overall design, and all of the other amenity issues that are considered by the proposal. What I've heard today is the key issue is height. There seemed to be less concern around some of the bulk form and scale, but more around how it relates to height. From my perspective, the design as presented is quite similar to the design that was determined and approved a couple of years ago. The overall design that presents looks excellent in its context. It has varying different elements to it and configuration of it, a mixture of landscaping that softens contextually the site in relation to the area. And I am talking about the area in relation to the framework that sits in place. I do acknowledge that some of the existing development in the area is lower. From my perspective, they are my comments, and I had some concerns about a deferral, which from my perspective, potentially there's an expectation that the development will look like the one that currently has been approved and is currently in play and live at this very moment. Those are my comments. With the mover like a right of reply and close the debate.
Thank you. I just would like to say that this deferral, I believe, will provide the opportunity for a closer regard to the strategy that has been presented, and that this building is going to set a benchmark really for the surrounding area. And what happens here is really significant. The quality of the design, how that presents in the streetscape is commendable at this stage. However, the issues to do with the height, bulk, are still benchmarks that we would like to get fine-tuned, more aligned to the strategy of where we're going. That's the view I think of. It's my view, but also as a councillor, having spent a lot of time in getting these strategies through the community and through all the steps, it's a solid piece of work that needs to be given regard to.
Thank you. Right of replies had. We are going to the vote. It is listed in your agenda. It's a deferral. All those in favour? Against? The minute taker is carried 4-1. We now move to our next item. It is still within Part B. There are two parts to this item, an A and a B, and they are to do with a Stirling Highway, the development to the shopping centre. We have one presenter and we have two officers relative to the two separate agendas. So we'll deal first with the presentation from Ashley Maple, and then we will have both sets of officers forward once we deal with the next section. Whenever you're ready, if you'd like to start the presentation.
I'll be speaking in support of the application to amend a condition of development approval in relation to items 4.1A and B. David Majorana and I will be available to assist with any questions that you might have. As you are aware, the City of Nedlands recommends approval for an amendment to condition 35, requiring a 1 metre wide strip of land abutting Stirling Highway to be ceded free of cost, while setting aside the remainder of the reserve as a separate lot for acquisition. This 1 metre wide strip of land will allow for curbing to restrict right turn movements from Stirling Highway into Stanley Street. It's this movement that has been identified as being unsafe, both in the current scenario without the development and in the post-development scenario. This restriction on right turn movements provides an interim solution to concerns around road safety until main roads prioritise the upgrade works to Stirling Highway. WAPC policy allows for road widening land to be created as a separate lot for acquisition where it is not required immediately. Main roads have confirmed that the upgrades are a long-term project and not on any current works list, and we therefore believe that our proposal meets the WAPC policy measures. The DPLH report discusses the nexus of the condition and how it relates to road safety concerns stemming from the need for a channelized right turn from Stirling Highway into Stanley Street. The trigger for this is when turning movements reach 6 in a peak period. This intersection has currently between 6 to 8 right turn movements in the peak period, meaning that the channelized right turn is required now. The current condition 35 does not meet the 3 tests of validity for conditions that the DPLH says that it does, as the need for land required for the channelized right turn does not fairly and reasonably relate to this development, and it is needed now. The remaining reserved land outside the 1 metre wide strip will be available for acquisition when main roads prioritise the upgrade works to Stirling Highway. This matter has been considered by the SAT previously, and we have provided examples in our presentation request where the SAT found in favour of removing conditions imposed on both subdivision and development applications. The condition required land to be ceded free of cost for road widening. In both matters, the SAT found that the developments did not generate the need to cede the land. There was no indication of timing for the works that required it, or with the works. It was therefore found that the conditions failed to meet the 3 tests and the conditions were removed by SAT. We respectfully request that the DAP do not support the recommendation contained with the DPLH report and instead determine both reports based on the recommendation provided by the City to approve an amendment to condition 35 requiring a 1 metre wide strip of land abutting Stirling Highway to be ceded, with the remainder of the reservation to be set aside for acquisition. If you have any questions, David and I will be happy to help. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there any questions from panel members before we go to the officers? Yes.
Where did that 1 metre dimension come from? Was that from engineering drawings or?
There was a traffic report that was prepared as part of the original application when it was determined, and that identified an interim measure to accommodate curbing, and that 1 metre wide strip is a result of that interim.
It comes out of the original traffic report. Now that traffic report also was requiring some median strips in Stirling Highway.
Yes, to restrict the right turn.
Restrict to the right turn from Stanley.
To restrict the right turn from Stirling Highway into Stanley.
Oh, okay. Wasn't it also restricting right turn from Stanley?
Yeah, sorry, you're right, yeah.
It'll limit Stanley to, or Stirling Highway to a left in, left out.
That's right. Now, the applicant's not required to pay for that on my.
The works?
Yeah.
No.
There's clause 42, condition 42 requires them to pay for something regarding access to commercial vehicles, not the general.
No.
In fact, if it assists the advice notes that come under the heading of main roads advice. Both 9 and 10 talk about those works being undertaken by main roads.
Yeah, okay. There's a drawing which Main Roads has recently provided, which is in attachment 4 of the WPC report. That shows that law apply for a road for essentially a right turn pocket. Have we got a dimension on that? Do you know how much land is that just a sketch at this stage?
I believe so. I don't think it's a
There's
detailed drawing.
no
at this
dimension
point.
on that. No. Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions? There's no further questions at this juncture. We will have city officers from both from both City of Nedlands and WAPC.
We know the officers from the City of Nedlands and the traffic. Could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Jeremy Thompson. I'm a Senior Planning Officer for the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage.
Thank you. Officers, would you like to make comment? First, we'll go to the city officers at 4.1A, and then we'll go to officers at. So we're still in this meeting. If people can just be mindful. And then we'll go to the WOPC or DPLH officers, I beg your pardon, for 4.1B. So first off, the city officer like to make some comments.
Yeah, just briefly summarize it. This is essentially a conflict between a condition imposed by Main Roads and condition imposed by the Planning Commission in regards to the ceding of land and how it should be done. We've made our recommendation based on the information we had at the time, and then there's Main Roads submitted further information for the commission. They based their. That's all I would have to say.
Would you like to make some?
Yes, thank you very much. Before I get in, I would also like to introduce Ben Hesketh, who's joining us just on screen, is the planning manager for the Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage. Just like to touch on a few particular points. As kind of mentioned, obviously the department's involvement has been related to the Metropolitan Region Scheme application, given the delegation was taken from the local government due to the disagreement with Main Roads. We also note that the information that was provided by Main Roads was after the item had already been presented to Council for Nedlands. So I do get that Nedlands' recommendation didn't have this information for them to be able to present to Council. In terms of touching on a few items raised by the applicant, I think I just want to touch on that the argument being put forward about the uncertainty based on the whole of Stirling highway upgrades is understandable, given the timeframe for the whole works to be done. The department's report is based on the interim measures that have been put forward as part of Main Roads' latest submission to us, which include the channelized right turn intersection only. We feel, or have been advised by Main Roads, that this process will be significantly simpler than obviously the whole of Stirling highway upgrades and have a reduced timeframe to match. The timing of this is also linked to the development as well. It's not something, and I'm going to get to a point on this a bit further on, but the development does cause the need for this intersection to be upgraded. It's not something that the Main Roads would be progressing the upgrading of this at this stage, noting that currently there is 6 to 8 turning movements. This is very low on the scale of priorities that Main Roads would be looking at, and it would probably be something that's even further down the track if it was just 6 to 8 movements. Based on the development, this is increasing to between 30 to 70 movements, depending on what other changes are happening to the road network. In terms of the use of DC 1.7 and draft operational policy 1.12, the department understands there is the ability to set the land aside, but as I outlined in our RAR, we don't consider this to be the appropriate option. And in relation to the SAT cases that were put forward, just want to quickly touch on that. The first of these is in relation to a subdivision application. SAT found that this was not the appropriate time to cede the land, and in fact, as part of that SAT item, they talk that it probably would need to be considered in further detail at the development application stage. And the second SAT item is in relation to additions to a single house, which certainly at an officer level, we agree that there is no need and nexus for the widening of a laneway based on extension to a single house that doesn't increase the density. And I believe that was the points we wish to raise. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, are there questions to any of these? Yes, councillor Kerry-Smythe.
Thanks. I just wanted to check in with the officers about, you've got two, the City of Nedlands officers. We've got two recommendations for us. First one, 4A, is for approval of a change of conditions. And the other one is a refusal based on information that's come through from the state government agencies. So are we hearing that there's more information? Is your decision, do you still stick to your decision based on the sequence of letters that we have before us?
Based on this information, we're of the opinion that it's still a need and nexus question. Although I'm not aware of the SAT cases that the commission has been looking into. So we would stay with our argument that it's a need and nexus regarding this specific roadworks. But again, acknowledging that once we make a recommendation contrary to main roads, it goes to the commission for.
Just for the record, there's a sequence of letters and dates, and I note that on page 373, which is a letter, I guess, from you, that the date is the wrong year. It's January 2023. It should be 24, I believe, because the letter refers to all things that unfolded in 23. So just for the record, can that be corrected somehow? So does that make any difference?
Sorry.
373.
So just for the minute taker, referring to referencing the date on it, could you just repeat that loud enough for the minute taker?
Thank you. So it says the 4th of January 2023, but all the material in it, I think, should be 2024.
Yes,
so,
we confirmed that was a typo.
Yeah. So I was just trying to see the sequence and whether whether the city officers had all the information that what's being discussed. Has that been the final part? Are there any missing documents?
No, I think everything that we've received is in there, and I think the final letter from Main Roads is in the commission's attachment list.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? Let's jump to John.
Yes, the department. You said in your presentation that this development was a cause for this right turn pocket to be there. You said in your written words that you used the word catalyst, not cause. Is there a distinction between? I mean, it seems to me that the cause exists. That is, it's already at a limit where it is caused to be needed. Is catalyst a more accurate description of what the project actually is?
Yes, I do believe catalyst would be more correct.
It's not actually the cause, it's just the catalyst.
The trigger point for the right-hand channel under Main Roads guidelines is each right turn movements per peak period, which is right on the cusp.
Yeah, where we are
That's a
now.
guideline though. It's not a written law, and this development is causing a significant increase in the number of those movements that would definitely require that improvement to be implemented. Main Roads have only asked for the land to be set aside. They haven't asked for the right-hand turn movement to be constructed itself.
Sorry, could you speak a touch louder?
Sure. Main Roads have only asked for land to be set aside, ceded. They haven't asked for the right-hand channel to be constructed. So they've been fairly pragmatic in Department's view in regard to this issue.
Just to follow up, the attachment 4 has got a drawing, the last drawing on there, which shows a coloured section, which coloured cerise purple, whatever colour you want it to be. Is that the land which is required for the widening? Is the first question. Second question, does that take up all of the road widening reserve or not? It looks to me it only takes part of it.
For the chair, yes, that is the area that's been identified as being needed. No, it does not take up the entirety of.
So it only takes up part.
That's correct.
Do we have a dimension on that? Or is that just a sketch at this stage?
That was what's provided through to us by Main Roads.
So there's nothing more than this drawing. This is as good as it gets.
Could I provide some extra context on the actual warrant in terms of the right turn movement?
Yeah.
This is the warrant criteria for right turn pockets, or effectively different intersection treatments. You've got basic right turns, auxiliary right turns, through to a fully channelized right turn. And effectively the warrant criteria is a graphical representation of a formula that some very clever people over at Department of Main Roads in Queensland came up with a few years ago now, which is essentially a benefit cost ratio between the expected number of crashes that would occur at a basic right turn intersection without any channelization versus the cost of providing a channelized turn. And the benefit cost ratio is 1. So the graphs that we see basically say that if you are to spend the amount of money on a right turn pocket, you'll get more benefit out of that channelized right turn for the crashes that you would expect on the normal road network. The problem with applying this warrant criteria to situations such as Stirling Highway is the actual cost that goes into that formula to produce those graphs has a right turn pocket costing about $35,000. And I think we can all agree that the cost of producing constructing a right turn pocket on Stirling Highway will be far greater than $35,000. So the actual justification around that BCR does provide a formula that allows you to put other costs and other crash numbers into that formula and determine another BCR, but it hasn't been applied at all. So in terms of warrant around going, oh yes, it triggers it or it doesn't, saying it's above 8, so it triggers the warrant criteria, has failed to take into the other account of that formula, which is the cost of providing that versus the likely number of crashes that would occur. And the behaviour along Stirling Highway with how Stirling Highway is laid out now is that you effectively have a slow lane and a fast lane. And all along Stirling Highway, you've got a number of uncontrolled right turns. Smythe Road just up the road is a prime example where it's very normal for motorists that are travelling along Stirling Highway and do that regularly to effectively know that they get into the outside lane as they're approaching Smythe Road because you'll often get a queue of vehicles.
Just as you stand on there, what's the movement, the right turn movement on Smythe Road? Do you know?
The number?
Yeah, the number.
I don't know off the top of my head, but the queuing.
Same order of magnitude as what you've got?
It'd be a similar order of magnitude. Yes, that's right. The modelling that was completed as part of the applicant's transport impact assessment was provided to Main Roads in terms of the actual operation of that movement, and the queuing wasn't taken as being excessive or anyone had any problems with, and that hadn't triggered the need for a right turn pocket to be applied or needed at that stage.
So that's why the traffic, anything in the approvals up to date haven't shown any right turns.
That's correct. That's correct, yeah.
Any other questions? I have a question to DPLH officers. I think I heard you indicate that I'm trying to draw the distinction between what land is required directly as a result of development, particularly in relation to the turning, as well as the other road treatments, which is the islands, in order to prevent the right turn movement. So you've got left in, left out. Did you say that not all the land is required? And if not all the land is required, what bit of land do you say is required? And is it the picture we have in our papers that I think is attached to, I think it's attached to the applicant's, one of the submissions. It's a blue and green separation
It's this one,
diagrammatically.
this one.
So through the chair, so there's been two diagrams that have been put forward in terms of alternate options. The blue and green one I think you're talking about is an option that the City of Nedlands and the applicant kind of discussed and put forward, and that was an alternate that has the 1 metre area given away. The area that the department's looking at is the magenta purple area on the last
It's the
page.
main roads drawing, yeah, it's the last drawing on attachment 4 of your submission.
That's correct.
But there's no dimension on it. We don't know how much there is.
That's essentially what I'm trying to get at. Any further questions at this juncture? If there are no further questions, we will go back to the agenda. And, 2 items. We have now got 2 items, different recommendations about the same matter. We are dealing with the first item, which is 4.1A. There is a recommendation in the agenda. Is there a move of the RA recommendation? It is moved Kerry Smythe, seconded John Syme. Would the mover like to speak to the item?
Thank you. Yes, this is the recommendation to amend condition 35. So there's two parts to this. Accept the application as Form 2, and the second clause is to approve the amendment 35, and that amendment 35 has a part A and B, which basically says that the 1 metre wide strip will be seeded, and that B, the remaining MRS reserve will be set aside until a future date and will have to be compensated for when it's required in the future. So that is the case that the City of Nedlands officers are still recommending, and I will move it as that, as the officers have suggested, recommended, I should say. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any, sorry, the seconder like to speak to that?
Yeah, well, briefly, look, this is a need and nexus issue, I think, entirely. And really the need has been identified in the original approval. It's been dimensioned. The proponent will be paying for all of that. Proponent is getting off a little bit lightly because it's not paying for any of the median works in Stirling Highway, but they're fairly minor, it seems to me. And it looks to me as if the requirements for the right turning pocket, to the extent which is now sketched in the current drawing, are really after the event, and there's things which have happened subsequent to this. And again, if this flows on to 4.1B, which I think it should, there's no dimension on that, and again, need and nexus is there. There is no way that the whole of the future road widening area can be seeded over to main roads or to anybody at this stage at no cost. So I think that the city's position is the correct one, and that's what I think the one I think we should adopt.
Any other speakers on the motion?
Yes, briefly, I agree with those comments from my colleagues. Yes, I don't see it is a need and nexus issue, and I don't see the need for extensive land holdings to be given up or ceded at this point in time. However, that intersection needs some work. So on that basis, I'll be supporting the RAR recommendation.
Any further speakers on this item? No further speakers. We move back to the move for right of reply and close of debate.
No further comment, thank you.
Debate has been closed. We have a recommendation on the table. All those in favour? Is carried unanimously for the minute taker. We now move to item 4.1. There is a RAR recommendation on the table. Is there a mover of the recommendation on the table? For the minutes taken, the RAR recommendation at item 4.1B has lapsed as there is no mover and no seconder. We now go back to the members. Is there a mover for an alternate recommendation from the member? John Syme.
I move conditions equivalent to the one in 4.1A.
The mover is moving a condition that is similar as an alternative as in the wording as contained in 4.1A. Is there a seconder to the alternate recommendation? Seconded, Leo Donoghue. Would the mover like to speak to the item?
Nothing further. I think I've just said everything.
Would the seconder like to speak to the item?
No, nothing further from me.
Any further members that would like to speak to the item? There are no further members. I'll go straight to the vote, assuming that you do not want to write a reply. Mover. I'm going straight to the vote. We are dealing on the alternate recommendation, which is similar language, is the same language as 4.1A. All those in favour? It is carried unanimously for the minute taker. The minute taker could identify that is or record that is 11:17, and we are now changing members, and we're going to part C. Good morning. It is now 11:23. So we're getting a little bit of feedback here, 11:23 a.m. and we are recommencing the meeting dealing with Part C, City of Stirling. We have a change of members. We have Councillor Suzanne McDale. Welcome into the meeting, Councillor Suzanne McDale, and Councillor Teresa Olo. Is that how you pronounce it, Councillor?
That's correct. Thank you.
Thank you. We also have members who are in the room. To my furthest left is John Syme. To my immediate left is Leo Donahue, Deputy Presiding Member, and my name is Francesca Lafanti. Members, there's been a series of information provided as part of this agenda. Can I have a show of hands that you've duly considered all matters before you on today's agenda? That is unanimous for the minute taker. Members, are there any disclosures of interest?
No. No.
Thank you. There are nil disclosures of interest. We are dealing now with item 3.1, which relates to Chester Avenue in Dianella. We have a number of presentations listed, and we will deal with those presentations in the order that they appear. We'll deal with all presentations. We'll deal with the first 4 presentations, and then we will have questions from panel. We'll have the final presentation from City of Stirling officers, again back to panel, before moving to the motion. And as you're all aware, the motion is that's contained in the RA that was submitted initially with the document, and there's been a supplementary information that's been provided. All members have both those documents. Yep, great. Okay, we will now move to the first presenter, Felicity Lamb. And just to advise everybody, there's been a change in the DAP DAP rules, and there are 3 minutes for presentations. I am being assisted by DAP Secretariat in terms of the timeline, and I'll advise once you get to that 3 minute if you can focus on the key matters you'd like to get across. Members do have the presentation material.
So can I just ask the question then? You've all read what I've written? Or?
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. Okay, so I'm representing pretty much the majority of parents from Our Lady's Assumption School and some of the neighbours around the site. Just to start to say, this is a non-compliant development with 6 levels of residences and facilities that enable views overlooking 3 to 12-year-old children. Non-compliance is a choice. It was in the first submission a choice, and in this submission it's a choice as well. Where this RAR refers to a reduction in height, it still means non-compliant. In a small cul-de-sac in an area specifically zoned for maximum 3-level buildings, the residents in this part of Chester Ave do not want this building. The families of Our Lady's Assumption Primary School next door do not want this building. Our councillors unanimously voted against the RAR. They clearly understand their commitment to community, especially to children, although I don't believe our mayor agreed. Can you ask yourself, would I send my child, or would I want a family or friend's child to go to a school with a 6-level building overlooking them? Would I feel comfortable knowing that a residential neighbour can see straight into their classroom? This is not in the CBD, and it is not directly on an urban corridor. Just want to say every single adult in this room has a duty of care to children. Although children in the RAR are referred to as education establishment. Maybe the planning don't understand that children move and they're human. Development like this may not become a precedent because of a small note within a council report, but it will be referenced regardless for future projects. All adults here are the decision makers, deciding the safety of children, their right to privacy, their right to not feel watched or overlooked, their right to feel confident and comfortable. This non-compliant building enables and gives opportunity to the overlooking of children. While at school, at drop-off time, in their classrooms, in their playgrounds, walking between classes, and when they go home. This non-compliant building enables apartment residents to have views of children sitting at their classroom desks as close to approximately 12 metres away. This Urbanista presentation has never gotten the school section right. So that's it there on the board. In the first and the revised submission, it is incorrectly drawn. Residents appear to be uniformly gazing at a gutter line, which avoids demonstrating the clear view into classrooms. So they're the red lines that we've drawn. This non-compliant building provides views of children in their place of education where they should feel confident and comfortable while learning, running, playing, kicking a ball and doing handstands. From their first day of kindy as young as 3 to their graduating primary school before they are teenagers. This non-compliant building will affect children now and in the future. Our Ladies Assumption Primary School is not going anywhere. It is part of the Chester Ave cul-de-sac community and has been for over 50 years. Well before planning reforms were announced by our state government at a luncheon sponsored by developers and their consultants. The school has award-winning architectural buildings that have captured the future scale and the character of the area. A 6-level apartment assumes adjacent residences will be demolished within the decade. I asked the City of Stirling.
Taking on to the 3-minute timeline.
Okay,
if you want to
sure.
focus on your key points.
Okay, well, I'm just literally reading. If you have to stop me, then
If
you
you've
have to
got some
stop me.
key points in that you want to highlight to
Yeah,
us.
basically the whole thing is key points. I'd just like to also say that myself and another mother did most of the advertising, if you like, to the school. There is a picture that we've got, maybe it's the next slide, showing the sign. That can come up. That's it there, that's how it was advertised. We set up a petition online and we've now got over 500 signatures not wanting this building. Urbanista have considered authority rejections a hurdle. They go over local planning strategies and focus on the R codes, and they see that as a win. I really want you to note the R codes do not cover schools as neighbours. Therefore, they do not consider overlooking hundreds of children in a quiet suburban cul-de-sac. Children are omitted from the R codes. Some of the element objectives avoid, they seem to be one-sided, so they avoid requirements such as developments not adversely impacting the amenity of adjoining properties.
We are going to have to,
Stop it. I'll finish the sentence. A non-compliant development overlooking children while at school impacts the amenity of the school. So, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And to advise that we have a full copy of your document.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are going to take the next presenters, Philippe Soto and then Peter Marja and Frederick Triffett. Is that how you spell?
Frederick just provided everything.
Oh, it's just, I beg your pardon, sorry. Yes.
Should I start? Okay.
Whenever you're ready, yes.
All right, that's right.
And your
So we-
presentation is up here.
All right. Good morning, everyone, and members of the panel, and thank you for the opportunity to present our revised proposal for 39 Chester Avenue in Dianella. Our team's revised proposal for the site before you today has revisited important principles from our previous proposal while maintaining the commitment to a good design. Bulk and scale transition to the adjacent properties and interface with the public realm have been substantially reconsidered to respond to the communities and this panel's feedback in our last JIDF meeting. It delivers a more sympathetic outcome to the existing context while still setting a precedent for the future of the area. As stated by the DRP within the RAR, this proposal demonstrates that it's possible to respond to the qualities of a place at the same time as setting the tone for the future character of the area. No decisions have been taken lightly. The well-crafted view form has demonstrated its ability to sit comfortably in the existing context and still represent a genuine response to the future character of the area. This proposal uses the current context as an inspiration. It imagines what the future of the region binary district center could look like. Key changes since we met last time. The height of the building has been reduced from 6 to 5 stories, increased setbacks for the upper levels.
to the north and the south, aimed to deliver a response that is more in line with the context of the adjacent properties and the urban environment. The successful outcome of our proposal could have not been achieved without an extensive collaboration with the local design review panel. We have demonstrated that increasing density in key locations within our well-established suburbs is achievable by enhancing the distinctive characteristics of the local area and making a genuine contribution to the sense of place, all while being a good neighbor. Consistent support for pursuing additional height was a strong argument across all the 4 DRP meetings, achieving 9 out of 10 greens in our final sort session. The following 2 slides provide a detailed description of the changes before you today. The reduction from 5 to 6 stories offers a softer transition to the adjacent properties, particularly those on the south. The additional setbacks to the upper levels create a better transition to the view form, ensuring a clear delineation between the base and the upper levels. The 3-story base reflects some of the recent developments along Chester Avenue. And the many of our neighbors have been our priority. A detailed overshadow assessment has been undertaken to demonstrate that the proposed development provides a better outcome than what is deemed to be compliant, considering not only the current context, but also the future development within the area. Considering the strengths of the proposal and the full support from the local design review panel, we kindly request the panel to support our recommendation to approve this development. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. Whenever you're ready.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, panel members. Just by way of background, on the 13th of December 2023, a 6-story development was presented to the JDAP for determination with the recommendation of refusal by the city. At the meeting, the JDAP voted to defer the application to allow the applicant time to reconsider the scale, the bulk, the height of the development and its impact on adjoining properties. I'm pleased to say that we did not waste that time and the opportunity that was provided through the deferral. Immediately after the deferral, several meetings were scheduled with the city to present revised plans and seek feedback and an exchange on revisions that were proposed. A set of amended plans were agreed upon, which resulted in significant compromise, I believe, on the part of the applicant, but which both parties felt necessary in order for the development to be supported. Felipe has spoken to the changes, but I'll briefly go over them again. The primary revision was the removal of 1 floor from the development, which changed the number of stories from 6 to 5. The building now presents as 3 stories to the street in lieu of 4. The total number of dwellings has been reduced by 8, from 43 to 35. Setbacks have been increased by 900 mil to 1 metre to all sides in level 3 and 4 of the development. The roof terrace is reduced in size. Visual privacy is now fully compliant, and overshadowing, although not applicable to the assessment, is improved. Car parking has also been reduced, and plot ratio has come down from 2.43 to 2. So we've made some significant changes there, which I believe address the JDAP's reasons for deferral. In addition to that, the application was presented back to the DRP for another review. It's 5th, where 9 out of 10 of the scores were green. The one that wasn't sustainability, we believe that we've addressed that, and it's going to be conditioned on the approval in any event. In terms of context, the amended plans provide a more appropriate scale of development to the street and to the neighbouring properties. The podium remains at a height of 3 stories, which is consistent with the Dinella apartments across the road, while the increased side setbacks ensure that visual privacy is now fully compliant. Overshadowing is reduced, landscaping is abundant, and density is delivered in a manner which meets the desired future planning context while also respecting the existing character of the area. The JDAP's reasons for deferral were numerous, and the best way to demonstrate they have been considered and satisfied is for me to point to the officer report. The report is comprehensive in addressing every relevant planning criteria, and I'd like to thank the city's officers for working with us, especially over the last 6 months, to negotiate an outcome and obtain their support. In summary, I believe that the amended plans address the JDAP reasons for deferral. We have no concerns with the conditions of approval, and we respectfully ask the panel to approve the application today. Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. We will now go to questions from panel members. We have 2 members online. Are there any questions from panel members at this juncture? Yes, Leo Donoghue.
I just had a question to Ms. Lamb. Just you talked a lot about the non-compliance of this building of 6 stories. Can you just, and the issue of privacy and overlooking, would you feel more comfortable about a building that's 3 stories as per? So, but just looking at the plans, 3 stories, people still have that potential, looking at what you put up in terms of overlooking and your sight lines.
I think a couple of things. I'm an interior
Can
designer.
you, sorry, you'll have to come in closer. We've got no mics in this room.
Just being an interior designer, I've worked on multi-residential as well. The architects are clever enough to do this, absolutely. So I have no doubt that there would be overlooking into classrooms if they design a 3-level building. I know
That
that
would still occur with 3 stories.
I think they're clever enough to make sure it doesn't. I think it's easier to maintain the vegetation. They've got vegetation coming from the ground level up. I think that would be easier to maintain and block those views into classrooms. What was the second part of your question?
Oh, no, look, I'm just trying to gauge.
Yeah.
The main concern seems to be privacy and overlooking for the school.
Yeah.
And then secondly, you think it's simply over height and over building.
Absolutely, 100%. Yeah, and the overlooking, I think it's just speaking on behalf of the kids now, and sounds cliche, but in the future as well. I think this decision is massive.
Okay, so what about the other development that is to the, just over the road to the
Finbar.
north? There's balconies that are looking out onto Chester Avenue.
We didn't want that either. Finbar one. Nobody wanted that either, because the views from those first few terraces, if you like, see straight down the school. I think I might have mentioned that as well. You can see straight through to Grand Prom. So it's all the children's playgrounds, and that got approved. So we just keep fighting it, I suppose. But I shouldn't say fight, we'd like to work with them, because I think it's in one of the local planning strategies for City of Stirling, it recommends townhouses here. And I know financially that's not going to win for them, but it would be beautiful to have just townhouses here, and you could go 3 levels there, and it is possible to design them so you don't have overlooking, at least from that 3rd floor. There's ways to screen it at 2 levels, definitely.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Any further questions from panel members? I have a question to the applicant. I'd like you to walk through, and you can present it to any plan that you want on the board. I'm interested in you describing the design and I'm talking specifically about privacy here, I should say. So I'm really only talking about the boundary that faces the school.
Okay.
This context. Could you describe your design elements or treatments, and how you have dealt with overlooking just generally, as well as in the context of the school, and that's on all the levels. I know that you have 4 levels of building, and you've got a rooftop terrace here. So either one of you can speak to it. If you need to point to a plan, then that's fine as well.
I'll let Felipe speak to the design aspects, but I will just touch on the communication. We've attempted to engage with the school. I know that there was a lot of feedback that came during the initial consultation process, a lot of objections to this. I know that the city's officers have met on site with councillors and members of the community. We asked to be a part of those meetings. I wrote to the principal of the school. I sent him an email and called him and asked, we're available all the time. We wanted to, I guess, participate, and whilst we still may have had people from the school being upset with what was being proposed, we felt that it was important to listen to the community and try and respond. We were advised that the school did not want to meet with us, so that was put to bed, and through the city as well, that was sort of shut down. So we didn't do this. I guess we haven't tried to push this through. We try to sort of meet with members of the community and listen to the issues, but I just wanted to make that.
I do have a point on that if I'm allowed to speak. Am I allowed to speak, or
no?
Oh,
we'll come back to that point in a second. I just want to go through this bit. You mind?
So I just wanted to I guess say those words, and then we can talk to it.
So just a couple of things about the privacy, and I think our strategy is not only to the school in terms of minimizing any sort of impact to our neighbours to the north, which is the school, but also to the south.
You just might need to slow down a fraction.
All right, that's all right. I tend to speak pretty fast. Johnny's already looking at me, so to slow down. All right. Okay, so a couple of things in terms of how we have sort of resolved privacy, and it comes to different strategies depending where we sit on the building in which level. When we look at the 2 sort of wings to the east and the west, what we have done is on the base of the building, there are not really openings on the ground floor.
Do you want a plan up here?
Yeah, so when we look, I actually, unfortunately, don't have the full set of drawings. I don't know if you guys are able to share those drawings through the RAR. If that is okay with you, we might be able to be specifically.
So we're in the RAR now.
No, this is my presentation at the moment.
We have the RA up. Oh, sorry, do you want the RAR up on?
Just because that document got all the drawings, so we might just be able to.
We're just attempting to do that.
Yeah, that's
And then you can show us the plan, and as I say, it's
Yeah, that's fine.
the side facing.
the school. Yeah.
While you're doing that, Fleek, you might also address the drawing that Ms. Lamb has provided, because it shows slightly different interpretations of what the view lines are.
Absolutely, and I think we got that section as part of our pack, and actually comes to really just a specific sort of requirements from the R codes, how over privacy needs to be sort of assessed, right? We might have a different view on that, but at the end of the day, we've got to refer to what the rule is and how we're gonna sort of address that sort of component from the actual sort of school. Interesting to see is that the school building facing our building doesn't really have that many openings to our side, to some extent. But it's fair to say that the planners from the city of Stirling, they push us really hard to make sure that there were no privacy and any overlooking sort of issues to the school sort of side. To a point when actually there was a little bit of discrepancy in terms of what the expectations from the design review panel were and the planners from the sort of compliance perspective were. I want to be honest, we were really surprised in our first meeting with the design review panel with actually looking at the school from the passive surveillance perspective was actually seen as a good outcome from the design perspective. That is not taking or leaving apart the sort of community sort of feelings. But we were also concerned about that. We said, oh, we might just get a little bit of pushback from the design perspective about looking too much to the school. The first comment in that first meeting, when we went just massing models and some really basic sort of drawings, was actually looking at the school is a good outcome from the passive surveillance perspective. Once the school is empty, it's not bad for these apartments having a little bit of view to the school. It's a big open space, and it's good actually to look at it, you know, once the school is sort of not being used during the sort of school hours. But then it came the conflict with the sort of planning perspective that we needed to address the R codes. And it's interesting, and I agree with the comment, the R codes doesn't really talk about overlooking to a school. They're trying to apply the principles of a single residential building next to a multi-residential building next to another one, right? So our building separation doesn't comply. We were building another multi-residential building next door, and that's when the overlooking at privacy sort of concerns were raised. And we structured our central part in particular with a lot of landscape and planting that doesn't allow the residents of the building using the balconies to get to the edge of the building to look down to the school, right? So the discrepancy might be coming to actually what the interpretation from the school parents are in relation to overlooking, but our diagrams are just presenting what the actual rules are in terms of the corner vision and what sort of depth you need to provide for your landscape elements to avoid people getting to the edge of the building and look down. So what we have done for that central part of the building is to limit the access for people to the edge of the building to avoid that they're just easy to them to get on the edge and look down. They just get distant views from the balcony spaces on those apartments, especially on the central part. If you guys went through the sort of different sort of presentation that we did to the design review panel, we actually had to the wings of the building, the ones on the east and the west, we had larger openings, a 3 meter sort of setback from the neighbors. The design review panel, in our initial approach, we actually had, just hold on guys, I just probably go. The latest, yes, this is the latest drawings. So in our, and I might just start with probably, this is our probably typical sort of. So what we're looking in here is 3 different sections. So the sort of central part, the wing to the west and the wing to the sort of eastern sort of side. This wing in here, you can see that the main sort of source of light for these bedrooms is actually the balcony space next to it. It's not actually the sort of north, the facade facing to the school. So we have limited the sort of actually openings to that side. For the balcony spaces, what we have done is we have introduced landscape elements to avoid, as I mentioned before, people getting to the edge of the building and just looking down into the school sort of premises. Now, that strategy changes for the build to the sections of the building on the east and the west. Initially, we were pushed by the design review panel to have actually openings looking at the school. They say it's not bad looking at the school, right? From the planning perspective, that wasn't compliant. So what we ended up doing is we created these pockets where people will be looking in these sort of light wells, sort of cuts in the building. So when you're in your bedroom, you still achieve cross ventilation, natural light, but you're not really looking at the school at all. And you can see in here that we got these elements in here that allows that sort of ventilation and openings for, let's say, bathrooms and bedrooms. That also means that what we have done is, yes, we got some openings in here, to capture northern light, because that is just a good outcome for those bedrooms, but we got some breeze blocks in front of those glazing elements. So that mitigates any issues with overlooking of privacy to the school.
So all of those windows to the north of those bedrooms are all high level windows, the ones that are closest to the boundary.
Correct, correct. So that is the strategy, and this from the design perspective is probably not what the design review panel was expecting. Yes.
Just with the planter boxes, obviously that's going to, it's a combination of the planter boxes and the distance
And
from
distance.
the boundary. But the planter boxes, will they be looking there? They're not going to be planted with anything particularly high that would, it's more just going to be, I don't know, succulents or whatever that will spill over.
Cacao,
It's more
spill
the
over.
fact that you are standing behind the planter box and therefore looking down is, as per your diagram. I mean, it's difficult for us. We've got two different diagrams and one saying one thing, one saying the other.
Well,
Correct, but what we tend to do in that sort of case
how
is,
deep are those planter boxes? They're pretty
I
deep.
think the planter box are at least 1 meter.
Yeah.
A metre, okay.
1
So
meter.
That's, they're big planter boxes.
It's a big
Yeah.
planter box. And
1.2 high.
the diagram, as you mentioned, could have different interpretations, right? But the reality is that there are some rules in terms of what the connotation of these elements are going to look like. There are actually rules around how you measure that sort of element as part of the proposal. So that is when we came up with the idea of the deeper sort of planter boxes. The planners from the team from the city of Stirling agree with us, saying those deeper elements are going to mitigate that. Then an issue was raised about the apartments on the east and west sort of end, having some still accessible balconies. And we work, and I probably highlight that section to you guys. In here, if you guys look at this in here, this section in here, and this section in here, and this section in here, in our previous proposal, that was still accessible balcony areas for those units. Working with the planners, they say, guys, you guys cannot access that one. That's going to raise another concern about privacy, making it not accessible. We can get some pebble treatment, so you still recess from the banks, from your building edge, so you won't be able to see into your neighbors to the east, the school, or the south. So we've been really careful because the initial IRR, if you guys remember, raised a lot of concerns about some terraces still having overlooking sort of issues. And we had a brief conversation during our presentation last time. So we've been mindful, trying to balance what a good planning outcome is going to be from the privacy sort of point of view, but also from the design sort of perspective. Because the panel, through the sort of design process, felt really strong, especially about these elevations, which is the one looking at the school, not looking like a just flat walls, because the development next door might take a while to come up. And the last thing that we want in our suburbs is just buildings with just solid walls that don't really address the streetscape.
Any other questions at this juncture?
I hope I spoke sort of.
Probably summarize that visual privacy is
Slower was
compliant.
better.
Visual privacy is
Second one was
compliant.
strong.
Well, no, it's more than compliant, it's whether whether it functionally does the job that it needs to. That's our issue, as much as compliance.
And I don't think the officer report goes into detail about how that's achieved.
And can you probably planning question, could you talk about the considerations for the calculations that you did in terms of the school? What sort of considerations do you give in relation to the spaces that are being used, classrooms, playrooms, those play spaces on school as part of the design? The impact on neighbour consideration.
In terms of visual privacy?
Yes,
Yeah.
sorry.
Felipe, did you want to? I mean,
Well,
I think we kind of covered that.
The reality is that the only section that, or the only apartments that we will be probably looking at the school will be that sort of central sort of part. Not even the wings on the east and the west, on the east and the west will be able to do that. It's just that sort of central part. And our building is already 6.5 meters set back from the boundary. And then the additional sort of thickness of width of those sort of planter boxes. On top of that, the reality is the building next door from the school is at least another 4 or 5 meters away from the boundary. So when we, and this is when the conversation about building separation comes in place, the reality we're looking at buildings that will be at least between 11 or 12 meters apart in the way that they are sitting next to each other. And we're looking at the school building, a 2-story building, I believe is that one on that side, but our building is far enough from that sort of 2-story sort of building. So there are different sort of strategies, as I mentioned before, that we have implemented to mitigate any overlooking sort of issues in different sort of levels and different parts of the building. Because the reality is that we don't want to overexpose, obviously, the residents of the building to the school. It's a sort of both way sort of game to some extent.
Thank you. Any other questions from panel members? Panel members online? Teresa? No. Suzanne McDowell, is there any questions at this point? There's no questions, thank you. We'll now go to the officers at the city. If the officers would like to provide some comments on the proposal, you can respond to any of the comments that we've heard today, particularly in the context of the school interface and the designer's interfaces with the school. Over to the city officers.
Okay, good morning, panel members. So we prepared a multiple report based on a revised submission that has made changes to address reasons for refusal from the former JDAP last December. So I suppose that one, I guess, key issue is that obviously the city officers here have recommended support for the application with conditions, but we do have to note that the council has considered this item as well, as it was called in, though the timing it just worked out, it was after the RAR was lodged. So the formal responsible authority recommendation from the City of Stirling is a refusal. I think there's 4 reasons as per the additional information that was provided late last week. So I suppose in terms of the assessments, so there's probably some key issues, but 2 I think we'll comment on at this point will be building height. We note that it's been reduced by 1 story in height compared to the previous approval that went to the former JDAP. And I would note that there's discretion being proposed in relation to the current local planning scheme height provisions. So I suppose we've tried to look at this. We've looked at matters including like overshadowing impacts on adjoining property, the way that it would fit into the existing built form, the way it would fit into the future built form, where that is looking at redevelopment sort of in this sort of street block around the Dinella Shopping Centre, and particularly on the Dinella Shopping Centre site. So from having like careful consideration of that, element objectives of the residential design codes, the discretionary provisions in our local planning scheme, we sort of feel that particularly with the future context that notwithstanding that it is taller than the scheme and discretion being sought, we think there is a case where it can be supported. I suppose in terms of visual privacy, I note that one of the key comments from, I guess, public submissions and deputations today has been with visual privacy towards the adjoining school site. So those are broad comments from that. Is for the lower levels, we know that they're meeting the acceptable outcomes for an apartment building in terms of setback distances from a balcony. I'd also probably note that if we had a 3-story, say, green building proposal on the same site, which would be, it's also a residential land use, then it has deeded height provisions, which are also 6 metres from a balcony. So we sort of considered that, the manner that the planter beds restricting, overlooking downwards. Then I suppose for the upper levels, note that there is some, I guess, discretion relative to what an acceptable outcome would be. But considering the element objectives, we sort of consider matters like how the planter beds restrict down towards the school, and sort of the design of how the school is against the common boundary. So as if there's any further comments about the manner that we've assessed the application, the manner that our scheme provisions or recommended conditions, we're happy to take questions and respond to those.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions to officers? If there are, sorry, are there any questions to panel members online? No, okay. I have a question to the officers. My question is about building form and scale. You've indicated in your report, I know you've talked about council recommendations as well, you've indicated in the report that the overall form, scale and bulk is appropriate in the context of the local area. Can you provide some further commentary in relation to, one, your scheme provides for a general discretion provision in terms of the consideration of height, and two, why this just a very short comment in terms of its context. I'm interested in your views about the design, overall design form, in terms of its context of the local planning provision.
Thank you through the chair. So we did consider this at length, noting it was one of the recommended reasons for refusal in the original report from the officers. We acknowledge that the applicant has reduced the development by a story, which is, as mentioned by the applicant, a significant compromise. So there is a discretion clause in the city's scheme. The way that the city's scheme sets height out in that area, it's to step away from, say, a shopping centre. The height is consistent, give or take, with that height that the shopping centre permits. We looked at the impacts, as Mr. Howe said, and I'll just pass to Mr. Howe to talk a little bit more about those impacts. So that was our assessment, really, looking at the context and then looking at the impacts of that height. So Cameron? Okay.
So I suppose in terms of height, and so through our RAR, we provide some sort of imagery as well, so we've sort of considered, I suppose partly would be the way that interacts with existing context. I suppose the main development of equivalent scale will be the apartment building across the road, which presents at 3 stories to Chester Avenue. And we know that some of the other buildings on that side are up to 4 stories. I guess in terms of like future context, so we have a structure plan through the Dianella Centre Plan. Obviously note that is, I think, adopted in 2012, so it will be due for a review soon. But it's sort of at this point sort of looking at around the like commercial building, commercial properties such as the shopping centre side of development sort of in the 3 to 6 story range at the moment. And then I suppose in more detail in terms of the immediate sort of timeframes, we've looked at the overshadowing. So we've had overshadowing diagrams sort of prepared by the applicant, which we sort of used as the basis of this. So we sort of looked at how the sun sort of moved, when the shadow is moving through the day, trying to look at where it's falling onto the adjoining properties and for how long. We've had consideration of the guideline scheme that the applicant sort of the box shape they prepared, which is just broadly based on acceptable outcomes for building heights and setbacks on the subject site. And we've also, for some of the further properties on Kerry Street, which affect overshadowing, we've had some regard to what could be built on the immediate property to the southeast, if that was sort of redeveloped in line with the current local planning scheme, just sort of see what the impact sort of would be in the future and whether this building is affecting the Kerry Street properties, which we've generally found not to be. So I suppose with overshadowing, we sort of find that the shadow sort of sweeps across the adjoining properties to some extent, and so that obviously there might be an hour or so where they're in sort of like in shade, so that they're courtyards or the back gardens, but that generally does show sort of sweep over the property, so they do get a reasonable level of sunlight, especially when considering that we've zoned this area sort of as an activity centre. I think that's sort of a reasonable level of sort of sunlight and solar access to those properties.
And my second question is, do you have any further comments to make in relation to privacy, particularly in the context of the school? I know your report refers to the element in here, but do you have any further comments given what you've heard today in relation to impact on the school?
It's obviously been sort of a key issue that we've looked at in terms of, and throughout the sort of application, trying to minimise visual privacy impacts towards the school site, knowing that we've had a lot of submissions that raise that as a concern. So it's that from looking at it, we feel that the design of the building sort of is in a way to try and restrict the manner they can look towards the school, I suppose through setback distances and through elements such as the planted beds, which is sort of positioned out beyond the viewing point of the balcony, so that sort of this blocks line of sight downwards towards the school buildings, particularly for the the upper stories of the development.
And my final point, again, in relation to the same matter, were there any particular provisions that were unique to the school itself? I'm particularly relating to, we've heard today and we're all aware of planning provisions relating to residential development and as it relates to residential development, obviously different considerations around commercial. Were there any specific elements that you identified as being on the school side as forming part of the consideration, other than obviously the obvious windows to the classrooms? Were there other elements that form part of your consideration? And we've heard today's presentation about view lines into classrooms and view lines into the school. Were there other considerations about the school or its operation in terms of days, hours of day and days a week and those types of things? What were the sort of considerations that the city gave in relation to impact on school, given the concerns have been raised?
Through you, Chair. So I think the applicant's team addressed this quite well. So I think Felipe addressed this. There's nothing specific related to the school. So the assessment is under the Residential Design Codes Volume 2, and it doesn't differentiate between a residential property or a school, but it is obviously in a residential context that you do undertake that assessment. So there's nothing specific, as you were saying, about hours of, overlooking of potential things like that. There's nothing in the planning framework related to that.
Those are my questions. Any other questions from panel members? If there's no questions, sorry, yes. Councillor, would you like to ask a question? You're on mute at the moment. I can't hear you. We're just checking, so we still can't hear you at the moment.
Right.
Yes,
Thank you. And to the officers, I'm just wondering, and thank you for listening to me. If we lost one more level and made it just a 4-storey building, would that be better with the privacy around the school and the resident?
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you for the question, Councillor Olo. So from the city's perspective, it wouldn't make much of a difference. So Mr. Howell explained that the upper levels, the overlooking is to roof form of the adjoining school and has been separated by, the built form to minimise the impact. That is an objectives assessment that's been undertaken, but losing a storey won't make any difference to the city's assessment of that. And the city is, to clarify, the city is supportive of what's been proposed.
Right, thank you.
Any other questions from panel members? If not, we move back to the agenda. There are 2 recommendations, as you will see from the addendum that was provided to it. The addendum refers that it's noticed that the officer's recommendation, which is included in the RA, as previously provided by the city, no longer applies. So what we're essentially dealing with in the first instance, we're dealing with the recommendation as provided by the city in the addendum, as we have 2 of them. That's a recommendation for refusal, and the recommendation that sits in the RA will be considered as an alternate recommendation. So we will go first to the recommendation in the additional material. Is there a mover of the recommendation? It is moved, Suzanne Migdale. She's on mute. Oh, sorry, you're on mute. You're on mute.
I did unmute myself, but somebody remuted me. Just to clarify, is that the for refusal that we are looking at?
Yes, apologies.
Yes, that's okay.
With 4 points to it, A, B, C, D.
Yes, correct. So that's what I'm moving. Yes, thank you.
So that is moved, Suzanne Migdale. Is there a seconder for the recommendation for refusal? It is seconded. Would the mover like to speak to the item?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, the city has gone over and over this application and along with a multitude of feedback, overwhelming feedback from the community, presenting clear and concise reasons why this should not be approved, and asking us, we have a community asking us to use our discretion in this instance. So there are many reasons that contribute to my recommending refusal for this application. I'll start at the beginning and rehash them for you. They include the building height restrictions, restrictions on said property under the codes are for 3 stories. That has not been met in this instance. Now, I know that there was talk around other heights close by, but the truth of the matter is they are alongside a school which is not even 3 stories, and then next, diagonally between them and the shopping centre, you've got the library, which is 1 story. So what we're looking at is not creating a smooth transition from where we should be seeing density and height closer to and on, in fact, the shopping centre plot. We're actually moving away from the shopping centre from 1 story to 2 stories and now to 5 stories, which just doesn't make any sense at all, and creates the issues, some of which are the overlooking into the school. I couldn't see any overshadowing study done showing impact on the school other than a couple of pages which were neither here nor there. And that was also raised by residents as concerning. The communal open space which overlooks the kids in the school, of course, is of a great concern. Chester Avenue already has to cope with school pickup and drop off of goodness knows how many cars, as well as an existing apartment building on a narrow street, which is not equipped to cope with additional traffic pressures and will, in no doubt, in my mind, create major parking problems, given that we are looking at 35 apartments, which could potentially home 80, 90, even 100 people. Those that do not have a car park will be looking on the street. So they will then be battling with mums and pups doing pick up and drop off. This is going to put so much pressure on an ordinary suburban street. Add kids into the mix, those children who do live close by, who walk to school, and you have a recipe for unforetold issues. I feel that it's unethical just on that point alone. The impact on the current apartment building across the road, which is 4 stories, which will definitely impact on some of their views, as was stated in the feedback. Then we have the point that over 500 locals have voiced their concerns online and do not want this 5-story development, which they do believe will negatively impact on their amenity. So that is people who live close by and cannot understand why this would even be considered in its present 5-story design. There are also potential concerns which I feel we must take into account around the growth of STRs, short-term residential apartments, and the overlooking into a school. That is something that we must responsibly consider. Impeding on children's privacy and a turnover of people, short-term residents. The lack of graduation to the surrounding properties I've already spoken to. The landscape elements which were raised in good faith, sure, with the 1 metre planter boxes which would come up to many people's waists or below. There's no guarantee of any height to form a barrier, and there's certainly no guarantee of anyone maintaining them to any level in order to create a permanent fix to privacy and overlooking. This is a really simple one. This building could have been designed with a parapet type wall on the side of the school, and future residents would have been quite happy and the school would have been happy and content. Even better still, if it was within the height restrictions that the city sets out, and even better still again, if potential in the future, and I know I shouldn't say this, but if there was potential in the future to allow egress access from Grand Prom. It's a no-brainer. It's not right, and we're trying to put a square peg in a round hole here. It does not and will not serve future generations. This is a small, narrow street utilised for a primary school, has been since I was primary school age. Nothing has changed. Traffic has increased insurmountably through the development across the road. We really are focusing on putting flats in cul-de-sacs, and the outcomes and the impact on residents and on amenity here just are not approvable in my mind. We must use our discretion and duly consider the drawbacks in this instance. So I cannot constitutionally approve this today. Thank you.
Thank you. The seconder like to speak to the motion.
Thank you. Councillor McDowell has addressed all my concerns, so I'm supporting everything she's mentioned in the talk today, and I won't be supporting the recommendation today.
Thank you. Are there any other speakers on, thank you, on the motion? Are there any other speakers on the motion? No other speakers? Sorry, John Simon.
No, I won't support this motion. I think this has been properly considered. I think I do acknowledge the overlooking aspects which have been identified. I think they've been properly addressed and quite skillfully addressed actually. So I think the matter of overlooking is one of perception, not reality in this case as regards to school. I think I've had a good look at this site. I've been down the street. I know what it's about. I think it'll fit the streetscape quite well. It'll complement the building across the road fairly well, especially at this height. I think it's a better design than we saw before, so I won't support this. I think the council officers have done a pretty good job in addressing all the issues, and I much prefer their recommendation.
Any further speakers on this item? Yes.
Yes, look, I concur with Mr. Syme's comments. This is part of an activity centre, and I acknowledge the concerns about privacy and overlooking into the school, but I do also agree that they have been well addressed. I also note that there is an existing development to the immediate north, and I think that this is, I think the applicant has gone to quite a lot of trouble to try to reduce and address the various issues, and I think that the city officers have very carefully taken this new proposal apart, and I'm confident that their assessment is correct and appropriate, so I'm not going to be supporting the refusal.
I'm going to make a few points on it. I don't support the recommendation on the table, having reviewed all of the documentation. The proposal, as indicated in the extensive information in the RA, talks about the various planning frameworks and considerations against it. In terms of a couple of key aspects, and I think one of them that's been much discussion today is that of overlooking on the school. I've got a couple of comments that I want to make on there. That is that the planning framework talks about a method of dealing with overlooking. It's not perfect, so not a perfect or an absolute prevention of overlooking. It is a method that has been identified and articulated in the planning framework in order to calculate it. I would concur with one of the members' comments that there is a perception potentially rather than a reality, and I haven't heard today any evidence that the occupants of all the apartments will be regularly viewing of the school or the children in terms of the school time. I know there are many schools that have public spaces, play areas, and others that are accessible, or not accessible, are viewable from the public domain in all sorts of manners. And I do understand and appreciate caution and concerns of members of the community and of the school towards protection of children and overlooking or inappropriate considerations. From my perspective, I just don't see the evidence that these sites will be this site will extensively impact the school as has been expressed. I think that and that is evidenced by the planning framework and by other considerations of the proposal in terms of the treatment of the building, how the designer has included planter boxes to the balconies, the skillful design that has related to looking at window locations. And from my perspective, that has definitely considered and addressed elements of overlooking consistent with the planning framework. So I don't support the proposal as it presently considers. I won't repeat the matters that have been raised against traffic. Those are my comments in this. I move back to the mover for right of reply and close of debate.
Hope it's okay. I've unmuted myself.
Yes, we can
yes.
hear you. That's great.
Okay. Look, I know that planning framework doesn't differentiate between a residence and a school, but perhaps they should. This in itself, this block is not part of the activity centre. Can I get clarification from officers on that? It was mentioned that it was, but I believe it is not.
Do the officers have one clarification they can provide?
Yes, so I can clarify the councillor's question that the school site is within the boundaries of the Dinella Activity Centre. So that's found all the land by Alexander Drive, Grand Promenade, Carey Street and Waverley Street. And then the cul-de-sacs of Chester Avenue is sort of within that.
It is.
Right. Okay. So thank you for clarifying. Look, just I guess at the end of the day, it's beyond the height restrictions, overlooking a school. It needn't have been designed in this way. We needn't be sitting here having this issue. In fact, I dare to say, should there have been a parapet wall considered on the side of the school to ensure due diligence in terms of protection measures to children that we could have taken, I'm pretty sure that nobody would have been against 6 stories. However, you know, when the height was not such an issue, but in this instance, the overwhelming response has been to come back with 1 story less, so it's still 5 stories, which is 2 more. We need to use our discretion to approve this. It is still outside of the 3 stories within our city planning framework. So we're asked to have discretion on so many elements in this instance that, you know, again, if you feel that flats in cul-de-sacs that overlook schools is the way to solve our housing shortage problem in WA, then so be it. But I would ask you to dig deep and think about how we can achieve highest and best outcomes. I don't believe that this would be achieving that. Thank you.
Thank you. Right of replies had. We are going to the vote. All those in favour? Against? Sorry, I'll start again. All those in favour? Against? It is lost 3-2 for the minute taker. We now move to the recommendation contained at the beginning of the RA, which is now the alternate recommendation. Is there a move of the recommendation, the alternate recommendation?
I'll move it.
It is moved, Leo Donoghue. Is there a seconder for the alternate recommendation? Sorry, it is seconded, John Syme. Would the mover like to speak to it?
Actually, I think I've said enough on this topic. I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Would the seconder like to speak to the item?
No, not a lot more to say. I think this is an RAC3 site. I think it's designed with RAC3 provisions inside, as modified by the city's scheme. I think the the way that it's been approached and the issues which have been addressed and reasonably addressed have been done quite skillfully. And I think this is worthy.
Are there any further speakers on the motion at the table?
No. No.
If there are no further speakers, I will speak to the item. In terms of the planning framework, I would agree that this proposal is approvable within the planning framework. It works within the discretion. Contextually located, it is within the adjoining the shopping centre. It's within a precinct area that is supporting development and encouraging intensification. The matters of impact have been addressed thoroughly through the report. I'm satisfied that those matters in a variety of ways, which include traffic, which include overlooking, overshadowing, they've been heavily covered off in the report and they have satisfactorily been addressed. It's a thorough report dealing with all those matters. As I've previously indicated, the issue of overlooking, I do believe this has been appropriately addressed in the design, and whilst, as I've already indicated, whilst there are elements of concern, I think the application's design was appropriately addressed it through both its form, its design, as well as its features, including its landscaping on building. And as I've already indicated, I haven't got any evidence to suggest that the heavy usage of the balconies and or overlooking will be occurring and or not inconsistent. The design is not inconsistent with the planning provisions. Overall, I think the exterior treatment of design is excellent. The stepping in and the materials that use are positive. The uppermost floor being the roof space, the communal space, is light frame structure and overall is soft in terms of its supportive materials, its finishes, as well as its landscaping around it, and it sits respectfully as the most uppermost floor. However, it is much lighter in frame and appearance to the levels below it. Overall, I think that's appropriate in the context of this site. Those are my comments. I move back to the mover for right of reply and close of debate.
No further comment. Close the debate.
Debate has been closed. We are going to the vote on the motion as written at the front of the agenda. All those in favour? Against? It is carried 3-2. We now move back to the agenda. There are no Form 2 applications. There's no SAT reconsiderations. We're now on Part D, other business. The SAT applications are listed. I have no comments on those. There is no general business that I have. And according to the meeting closed at 12:25. Thank you.